Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in Nisekoi and got married to Chitoge, Onodera, and Marika? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Eye of the Storm. The world, Naruto had learned across 2 lifetimes, was a creature of noise. It clamored and crashed, a relentless symphony of demands, desires, and declarations. In his first life, it had been the roar of battle. The cries of the wounded, and the endless political churn of a world clawing its way toward peace. In this life, the noise was different. It was the frantic, high-pitched chatter of high school hallways. The saccharine melodies of pop music spilling from storefronts, and the incessant, buzzing anxiety of youth. Yet, here, in the heart of Bonyari High School's classroom 1C, Naruto Arisugawa had carved out a pocket of silence. He sat by the window, his chin resting on his palm, his gaze fixed on the dance of cherry blossom petals against the azure sky. He was an island of tranquility in a sea of adolescent energy. To his classmates, he was an enigma. He was Naruto Arisugawa, the transfer student who had appeared at the start of the year with no fanfare and no history. He'd scored first in the entrance exams, a feat he repeated on every test since, yet he never seemed to study. In physical education, he moved with an effortless, liquid grace that made the most athletic students look clumsy. But he refused to join any sports clubs. He was polite to a fault, his replies always calm and measured, but he invited no closeness. He was a handsome, empty canvas onto which everyone projected their own theories. He's definitely the secret son of some billionaire, one girl would whisper. No way, he's got that look. He's a former child actor trying to escape the spotlight. Another would argue. Only a few looked closer. Ruri Miyamoto, from her seat 2 rows away, watched him not with romantic curiosity, but with the sharp, analytical gaze she applied to everything. Arisugawa was an anomaly, a variable that didn't fit any equation. He possessed no social media footprint. He deflected personal questions with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. But it was the small things that unsettled her. The way his eyes, a blue so deep they seemed to drink the light, would sometimes drift, carrying a weight that no teenager had any right to bear. Or the way he'd unconsciously track the movements of everyone in a room without ever turning his head, a predatory stillness masquerading as serene detachment. He wasn't just quiet, he was listening. He wasn't just calm, he was waiting. Her best friend, Kosaki Onodera, had a different perspective. She saw only his kindness. It wasn't the showy, performative kindness of boys trying to impress her. It was something quieter, more fundamental. A week ago, she'd been carrying a large, precarious bag of flour for her family's Japanese sweets shop, Onodera Patisserie. The paper had torn, and a cloud of white had erupted just as she stumbled. Before a single grain could hit the ground, a hand had shot out, impossibly fast, cupping the bottom of the ruptured bag. It was Arisugawa. He hadn't said a word, simply guided her to a nearby bench. Produced a plastic bag from his own satchel, as if he'd anticipated the need, and helped her transfer the contents. "You have some on your nose," he'd said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. His thumb had brushed her cheek, wiping away a smudge of white. The touch was feather-light, impersonal, and yet it had made her heart do a frantic, stuttering pirouette. He had smiled then, a small, genuine curving of his lips that briefly chased the ancient sorrow from his eyes. "Be careful, Onodera-san. The world has sharp edges." Then he was gone, leaving her with a salvaged bag of flour and a furiously blushing face. Today, that same quiet kindness surfaced again. The final bell had rung, and Kosaki was gathering her things when Raku Ichija, the perpetually flustered heir to the Shuegumi Yakuza clan, approached her, his face a mess of nerves. "Oh Onodera, I was wondering, do you remember that promise, from 10 years ago?" he stammered, fumbling with the intricate, heavy-looking locket around his neck. Kosaki's heart gave a hopeful leap. The locket, the promise. She clutched the strap of her bag, her own key hidden safely in her room. Ichija-kun. Before she could answer, the classroom door slid open with a violent bang. Bean sprout. The roar belonged to Chitoge Kurisaki, the fiery, blonde transfer student from America. She stormed into the room, her red ribbon bobbing with her furious steps. Her eyes blazing. She was, as always, a tempest of kinetic energy. She jabbed a finger at Raku. I've been looking all over for you. My dad wants to see you. Now. Raku paled, his romantic inquiry forgotten. Why your dad? Why? How should I know? Chitoge snapped, grabbing his arm. Something about your dad, too. Some kind of meeting. Just hurry up. She dragged him out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Shumiko, the class clown and Raku's best friend, leaned back in his chair with a theatrical sigh. On the plot thickens. Romeo and Juliet, Gangster Edition. Ruri pushed her glasses up her nose. Her father is the head of the Beehive Gang. His is the head of the Shuegumi. They've been at war for months. A sudden joint eating between the children doesn't bode well. Kosaki's hopeful expression had wilted into one of worry. I hope Ichija-kun will be okay. Naruto, who had been observing the entire exchange, finally moved. He slung his bag over his shoulder and walked towards the door. As he passed Kosaki's desk, he paused. He will be fine, Onodera-san, he said, his voice holding a certainty that was oddly comforting. Some storms are louder than they are dangerous. He gave her a slight nod and then stepped out into the hallway, his footsteps silent. Kosaki watched him go, a faint warmth spreading through her chest. She wished she could believe him. But the look in Chitoge's eyes hadn't been loud, it had been desperate. And desperation was the most dangerous storm of all. The air in the abandoned warehouse down by the docks was thick with the smell of rust, brine, and bad intentions. On one side stood a dozen men in sharp, black suits, their postures rigid, their faces grim. The Shuegumi, traditionalists to the core. Their leader, a formidable man with a latticework of scars on his face, sat impassively in a worn armchair. On the other side stood the Beehive Gang. They were a more colorful, chaotic assembly of men in loud shirts and leather jackets, their energy a stark contrast to the Yakuza's discipline. At their head was Mr. Adelt Kurisaki, a mountain of a man with a surprisingly jovial face that did little to hide the cunning in his eyes. He lounged on a stack of pallets as if it were a throne. Between them, standing in the center of the dusty concrete floor, were Raku Ichija and Chitoge Kurisaki. So, let's get this straight, Chitoge said, her voice dangerously low. To stop your goons from shooting each other in the street over every little thing, you want us, she gestured. Between herself and a sweating Raku, to pretend to be a couple. It's a brilliant stroke of diplomacy, darling. Adelt boomed, his Japanese thick with an American accent. If the heirs of our organizations are in love, it would be bad for business to continue the war, no. It provides a cooling-off period. A chance for cooler heads to prevail. Raku's father grunted his assent. The boy will do his duty to the family. Raku looked like he was about to be physically ill. He glanced at Chitoge, the girl who had kneed him in the face that morning, the gorilla woman who embodied everything he found terrifying, and swallowed hard. But we hate each other. All the better. It will be a convincing performance of teenage passion. Adelt roared with laughter. Chitoge's hands clenched into fists. This was her life. A cage. First, it was the cage of being a gangster's daughter, with her overprotective, gun-toting guardian, Claude. Then it was the cage of a new country and a new school where she couldn't make friends. Now, this. Being shackled to this weak, stammering bean sprout. Her gaze fell on Raku, who was visibly trembling, and a wave of contempt washed over her. A truce built on this flimsy foundation. With him as the cornerstone. It would last a week, at best. I won't do it, she said, her voice cold. Adelt's smile vanished. Chitoge. No. Find another way. This is insane. She couldn't even find the words. He was a gaping wound of weakness in a plan that required strength. The tension in the room ratcheted up. The Beehive gangsters shifted, their hands moving closer to their jackets. The Shuegumi members tensed, their eyes like chips of ice. The fragile piece was about to shatter before it was even formed. It was at that precise moment that a figure appeared at the large, rusted entrance of the warehouse. The silhouette was backlit by the setting sun, rendering it anonymous for a moment. "Excuse me," a calm voice called out, cutting through the hostility like a fine blade. I was told to make a delivery for an Onodera-san here. All heads turned. Stepping into the dim light was Naruto Arisugawa. He held a simple, medium-sized cardboard box filled with neatly arranged wagashi. He took in the scene. The two armed camps, the two furious fathers, the two miserable teenagers, and his expression didn't so much as flicker. He looked like a mailman who had accidentally wandered onto a movie set. Claude, Chitoge's ever-present guardian, stepped forward, his hand inside his coat. This is a private meeting, boy. You are not welcome here. Leave. Naruto's gaze swept over the room, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on each armed man. It wasn't a challenging look, it was an inventory. My apologies, he said, his tone still placid. The instructions were specific. A rush order for the Shuegumi leaders' gathering. A gift to sweeten the negotiations, I believe. He directed this last part to Raku's father, who blinked in surprise, having forgotten he'd ordered them. Chitoge stared at him. It was the quiet boy from class. The one who was always watching, always silent. What in the world was he doing here? Just leave the box and get out, Claude snarled, growing impatient. Naruto started to walk forward, his steps unhurried. He was halfway to the Shuegumi side when the world exploded. It didn't come from inside. A black van screeched to a halt outside the warehouse, and the side door flew open. 3 men, dressed in black fatigues and armed with suppressed submachine guns, burst in. They weren't Beehive, they weren't Shuegumi, they were professionals, and their target was clear. Their weapons swiveled directly towards Mr. Kurisaki. Time seemed to slow down. Adelt's eyes widened. Claude roared and drew his pistol, but he was too far away. The Shuegumi were frozen, caught between protecting their boss and reacting to a new threat. Raku screamed and dove to the ground, covering his head. Chitoge cried out, "Dad!" and started to run towards him, a foolish, suicidal impulse. But someone else was already moving. Naruto hadn't looked at the attackers. He hadn't flinched at the sight of the guns. The moment the van screeched, his body had coiled like a spring. He dropped the box of sweets. It landed perfectly upright, not a single cake disturbed, and launched himself forward. He didn't run, he flowed. The first gunman was bringing his weapon to bear. A blur of motion, and Naruto was on him. A palm strike, not to the face or chest, but to the man's elbow. A sickening crack echoed in the warehouse, and the gun clattered to the floor. Before the man could even register the pain, a precise chop to the side of his neck sent him crumpling to the concrete. It took less than a second. The second gunman, startled, turned his weapon. Naruto was no longer there. He had used the first man's falling body as a screen, moving low and fast. He rose up on the gunman's flank, his hand a blade that slammed into the wrist holding the gun, snapping it. The man shrieked, and an instant later, a heel kick to the back of his knee buckled his leg, and a follow-up strike to the temple silenced him. The third attacker, seeing his partners go down in the blink of an eye, panicked. He squeezed the trigger, spraying a burst of bullets. But his target was a ghost. Naruto swept to the side, the bullets stitching the air where he had been a moment before. He closed the distance in a single, explosive step. His hand shot out, not in a strike, but an open-palmed block, redirecting the barrel of the gun towards the ceiling just as the man fired again. The roar was deafening in the enclosed space. With his other hand, Naruto seized the man's throat. He didn't squeeze. He simply held him, his fingers pressing on specific nerves. The man's eyes rolled back in his head, his body went limp, and he collapsed, unconscious before he hit the ground. Silence. A thick, profound silence descended upon the warehouse. The only sounds were the distant cry of gulls and the frantic, terrified panting of Raku Ichija on the floor. The entire conflict, from the moment the assassins entered to the moment the last one fell, had lasted maybe 5 seconds. Naruto Arisugawa stood in the middle of the floor, surrounded by the 3 unconscious bodies. His breathing was even, his clothes were unruffled, he hadn't broken a sweat. He turned, his placid expression unchanged, and his gaze found Chitoge, who had frozen mid-step. He walked over and stood calmly in front of her, creating a barrier between her and the rest of the room. A silent, absolute declaration of protection. Every single person in that warehouse, hardened yakuza, ruthless gangsters, 2 of the most powerful criminal leaders in Japan, stared at the quiet high school boy as if he were a demon summoned from the deepest pits of hell. Claude's pistol was still in his hand, forgotten. Adelt Kurisaki was half out of his seat, his jovial mask completely gone, replaced by stark, undisguised awe. Raku's father had a look of utter disbelief, his cigar having fallen from his lips. Chitoge's mind struggled to process what she had just seen. The movements, they weren't human. It was like watching a river flow around rocks, a force of nature that yielded to nothing and overcame everything. He hadn't been fighting, he had been dismantling. There was no anger, no panic, no wasted motion. Just a terrifying, serene efficiency. This was the boy who sat by the window, who helped Kosaki with her flour, who carried a box of sweets. This was Naruto Arisugawa. Naruto bent down and picked up the box of wagashi. He walked over to the Shuegumi leader and placed it on a crate beside him. "My delivery," he said, his voice as calm as a summer lake. "I trust the negotiations can now continue." He then turned to face the two leaders, his gaze steady and direct. "This plan of yours is flawed," he stated, not as a suggestion, but as a fact. "A truce built on a weak foundation will crumble. It invites attack, as you have just seen. Your enemies perceive weakness, and they will exploit it." His eyes flickered to the prone form of Raku, who was just starting to push himself up, his face ashen. The implication was clear. Raku's father bristled, a flicker of pride and anger in his eyes. "And what would you know of our world, boy? I know that a promise is only as strong as the people who keep it." Naruto replied, his voice dropping slightly, taking on a resonant authority that commanded attention. "You need a deterrent, a symbol of stability, someone who, by their very presence, makes any attack seem foolish." He paused, letting the weight of his words and his actions settle in the suffocating silence. He then looked from Adelt to the Shuegumi Oyabun. "Your plan is sound in principle, but flawed in execution. You need a fiancé for Kurisaki-san. But you have chosen the wrong one." Chitoge's breath hitched. Raku stared, utterly confused. Naruto made his move. It wasn't a physical one, but a strategic gambit that was more audacious than his fight with the assassins. "I will do it." The words hung in the air, charged with impossible gravity. Adelt Kurisaki blinked. You will do what?" "I will take Ichijiku's place," Naruto said, his gaze unwavering. "I will be Chitoge Kurisaki's fiancé." A ripple of shock went through the room. Claude let out a choked sound of protest. Raku just gaped, his mind a total blank. Chitoge stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Was he insane? "You are a civilian," Raku's father said, his voice a low growl. "An outsider. And that is my strength," Naruto countered immediately. "I am unaffiliated. My involvement favors neither side. It projects unity, not a concession." More importantly, his eyes became chillingly cold. "I am capable of protecting her. I am capable of ensuring the peace holds. You saw the proof yourselves." He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to gesture to the unconscious men at his feet. His quiet confidence was more potent than any threat. He was presenting a solution, clean and simple. He was offering them not a shaky alliance, but an ironclad one, with himself as the linchpin. Adelt Kurisaki leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, studying Naruto with a new, intense scrutiny. He saw not a boy, but a weapon. A thinking, breathing deterrent far more effective than 100 armed thugs. A peacekeeper who could enforce the peace with his own two hands. He looked at Raku, still pale and trembling. Then he looked at Naruto, who stood like an unmovable mountain. The choice was laughably clear. A slow grin spread across Adelt's face. "I like this kid," he boomed, slapping his knee. "He's got guts and style." He looked at his Yakuza counterpart. "What do you say? He makes a compelling argument." Raku's father was a man who understood power. He had just witnessed a display of power that defied explanation. To refuse this offer now, after this boy had single-handedly saved his rival and potentially the entire truce, would be an act of profound disrespect and stupidity. He took a long, slow draw from a new cigar, his eyes narrowed on Naruto. "What is your name?" "Naruto Arisugawa." The Oyabun gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Very well, Arisugawa-kun. The arrangement is made. From this day forward, you are the fiancé of Chitoge Kurisaki. The truce holds under this new contract." He glanced at his son. Raku, you are dismissed. Go home. Raku looked from his father to Naruto to Chitoge, a maelstrom of confusion and overwhelming relief on his face. He scrambled to his feet, bowed shakily, and practically ran out of the warehouse. Chitoge felt like the world had tilted on its axis. It was happening again. Her life was being decided for her by powerful men in a dusty room. But this time was different. The anchor she was being shackled to wasn't made of lead. It was made of something else entirely. Something ancient, solid, and terrifyingly strong. Her father was laughing, clapping Naruto on the back, who took the heavy blows without moving an inch. Her guardian, Claude, was staring at Naruto with a mixture of pure hatred and grudging respect. And Naruto was looking at her. His expression was once again impassive, but his eyes held a question. It wasn't romantic. It was practical. Can you handle this? She lifted her chin, a spark of defiance flaring in her chest. She had no choice, but she'd be damned if she looked weak. She met his gaze and gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. The deal was struck. The noise of the world had once again found him. The next day at school was a surreal pantomime of normality. The events of the warehouse felt like a fever dream. No one knew. The world went on, blissfully unaware. Raku seemed lighter, freed from a great burden. Kosaki kept casting worried glances his way, which he met with a sheepish, reassuring smile. For Naruto and Chitoge, however, everything had changed. The school administration had been informed of their relationship, a story about two families wanting their children to grow closer. They were expected to be seen together. To sell the lie, their first date was lunch on the school roof. It was awkward, silent, and charged with unspoken tension. Chitoge stabbed at her bento with unnecessary force. Naruto ate his rice with methodical patience. Why? Chitoge finally broke the silence, her voice tight. Naruto didn't pretend to misunderstand. He swallowed his food before answering. Because it was the most logical solution. Logical, she scoffed. You threw yourself into the middle of a war between two of the biggest criminal organizations in the city. You don't even know us. I know that a stray bullet doesn't care who it hits, he replied, his voice even. Your war was spilling into the streets. It was only a matter of time before someone uninvolved, like Onodera-san or her family, got hurt. This was the fastest way to stop it. Chitoge stared at him. He hadn't done it for power, or money, or for her. He had done it for civic duty. For the safety of a girl he'd barely spoken to. It was so absurd, so ridiculously noble, that she didn't know whether to laugh or scream. And what do you get out of it? She pressed, searching for the angle, the hidden motive. You can't possibly want this. To be tied to me, to my family. I want a quiet life. Naruto said simply, his gaze turning to the sky. It was the most honest thing he had said. This arrangement, if it holds, will provide a measure of peace for everyone. That is all I require. She wanted to rage at him, to call him a liar, to punch that infuriatingly calm expression off his face. But she couldn't, because she had seen what he could do. He could have walked away. He could have taken over. Instead, he had propped up a failing peace accord and asked for nothing in return. He was either a fool or something far more complex. As they sat there, the quiet boy and the gangster's daughter, bound by a contract forged in violence, Naruto suddenly went still. His head tilted slightly, his eyes losing focus for a second. A prickle of static ran along the back of his neck. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in this lifetime, but one his very soul remembered with chilling clarity. It was the whisper-thin echo of a malevolent chakra. Faint, distant, like the scent of ozone before a lightning strike. It was the scent of wrongness. The scent of a predator from beyond the stars. His first life had been a constant battle, culminating in a war against a literal goddess. He had fought and bled and clawed his way to a peace he had guarded until his dying breath. He had been reborn into this quiet, mundane world, a gift he cherished more than anything. He had hoped, prayed, that the ghosts of his past would remain buried. But as he sat on that roof, with the sounds of the school below and the girl he was now sworn to protect beside him, Naruto Uzumaki understood a cold, dreadful truth. A ghost had followed him. And the silence he had worked so hard to build was about to be shattered. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Echo of a Promise. The news of the new couple spread through Banyari High like a shockwave. Naruto Arisugawa and Chitoge Kurisaki. The Silent Prince and the Thorny Rose. It was a pairing so utterly nonsensical that it looped Ed back around to making a strange kind of sense. The two untouchables, the quiet enigma and the volatile transfer student, had apparently found common ground. The school's official gossip network, captained by Shu Maiko, went into overdrive. It was bound to happen, Shu declared at his desk, which had become an impromptu headquarters for dissecting the new social order. He gestured with a pocky stick. Opposites attract, my friends. It's physics, or chemistry. One of those. Ruri Miyamoto, ever the voice of reason, pushed her glasses up her nose. Their families have business ties. This is likely an arranged acquaintance to foster goodwill. It's political, not romantic. Ah, Ruri-chan, always so cynical. Shu wagged his finger. You're just missing the poetry of it all. Can't you imagine their first date? He, with his zen-like calm, and she, a raging inferno of passion. He'd probably recite a haiku while she drop-kicks a vending machine that stole her drink. Kosaki Onodera, listening from her desk, forced a small, watery smile. She felt a pang in her chest, a quiet, selfish ache she quickly tried to suppress. She was happy for Ichija-kun, who now seemed perpetually relaxed. Read from the terrifying duty that had been thrust upon him. But seeing Arisugawa-san, the boy who had shown her such unexpected, gentle kindness, now officially linked to the intimidating Kurisaki-san, it felt strange. It felt distant. She told herself it was none of her business. For the two people at the center of the storm, the reality was far less poetic. Their lives had become a carefully choreographed play. They walked to school together, a buffer of 2 feet always maintained between them. They ate lunch on the roof, the silence punctuated only by the chirping of birds and Chitoge's frustrated sighs. Naruto was a pillar of unnerving consistency. He was never late, he never complained. He met her glares, her sarcastic barbs, and her simmering resentment with the same placid calm. It was, she decided, the single most infuriating thing about him. He was a wall, a handsome, polite, impossibly capable wall that she couldn't chip, couldn't scale, and couldn't understand. She saw him in the halls, and the memory of him moving through those assassins, a blur of deadly, precise motion, would flash in her mind. Then she would see him politely holding a door for a teacher, and the cone. ITIVE dissonance would give her a headache. Who was Naruto Arisugawa? The answer, it turned out, was about to get a lot more complicated. The disruption arrived on a Tuesday, during lunch break. It began not with a shout, but with a sound the schoolyard had never heard before. The sleek, synchronized purr of a dozen black luxury sedans pulling up to the main gate. Students pressed against the windows, murmuring and pointing. A security detail, men in suits with earpieces, emerged and formed 2 perfect lines. A long, crimson carpet was unrolled from the lead car all the way to the school's entrance. As the Prime Minister visiting, someone whispered in awe. The back door of the lead car opened. A single, elegant, patent leather shoe stepped out. It was followed by a girl with long, flowing brown hair and a prim, perfectly tailored version of the Banyari school uniform. She was beautiful, with large, expressive eyes and a demure smile, but she carried herself with the unshakable poise of a queen. She looked delicate, almost fragile, but her presence commanded the attention of the entire school. She glided up the red carpet, her entourage trailing her. She entered the building, her destination clear. The student body parted before her like the Red Sea. Up in classroom 1C, Shu was pressed against the window. Whoa, it's a princess. A real-life princess has come to grace our humble halls. Naruto, who had been reading a book, looked up. His eyes narrowed slightly. He felt it, a subtle distortion in the air around the newcomer. A life force that was bright but frayed. Like a beautiful silk tapestry being eaten by moths from the inside out. It was a feeling of chronic, gnawing decay. A curse. The classroom door slid open. The girl stood there, her gaze sweeping the room before landing, with laser-like focus on one person. Her demure smile widened into one of radiant, absolute joy. Naruto-sama, she cried out, her voice ringing with pure elation. She rushed forward, ignoring the stunned gasps of the entire class. She threw her arms around a startled Naruto, burying her face in his chest. I've found you. I've finally found you, my darling. Chitoge, sitting 2 seats away, shot to her feet. Hey, what do you think you're doing? The girl pulled back from Naruto, though she kept her hands firmly on his arms. She turned to face Chitoge, her expression shifting from joyous to one of cold, aristocratic disdain. And who might you be? She asked, her tone dripping with ice. To speak so familiarly with my fiancé. The word, fiancé, dropped into the room like a bomb. Shu's jaw hit the floor. Ruri's eyes widened behind her glasses. Kosaki felt her heart sink for reasons she didn't dare analyze. Chitoge's face went from pale to crimson. Your fiancé? I'm his fiancé, you crazy woman. The girl let out a delicate, tinkling laugh that held no humor. You, don't be absurd. A brutish, blonde gorilla like you. Naruto-sama has standards. She turned back to Naruto, her eyes sparkling. Tell them, my love. Tell them about our promise. Naruto gently detached her hands from his arms. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage. I don't recall making any promise. The girl's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered instantly. Of course you don't, silly. It was 10 years ago. We were just children, but I have never forgotten. She reached into her blouse and pulled out a chain. Dangling from it was a single, ornate, golden key. It was different from the one Kosaki kept hidden in her drawer. This one was more elaborate. With a heart-shaped head. You gave me this key, Naruto-sama, she said, her voice filled with unshakable conviction. And you kept the locket. You promised that when we met again, you would unlock it. And we would be married. I am Marika Tachibana, and I have come to claim what is mine. She held the key out to him, her eyes shining with anticipation. The Tachibana, sent another murmur through the room. Marika Tachibana, daughter of the police commissioner. She wasn't just a princess, she was the city's most powerful, legally sanctioned princess. Naruto looked not at Marika, but at the locket that now hung around his own neck, a necessary prop for his role. It had been Raku's. Now it was his. He had felt it before, but now, with one of its supposed keys so close. The feeling intensified. This was no simple locket. He didn't feel the echo of a memory or a promise. He felt the intricate, humming lattice of a fuinjutsu formula. A sealing jutsu. It was complex, ancient, and dormant. It wasn't designed to hold a memory, it was designed to hold something back. The keys weren't meant to open it. They were components, focusing points. His gaze shifted back to Marika, to the key she held, to the life force fluttering weakly within her. The curse wasn't just on her, it was connected, however faintly, to the key itself. The key was both a symbol of her devotion and the anchor for her suffering. This is a misunderstanding, Chitoge ground out, stepping between them. He and I are together. It's been decided, so take your key and your army of butlers and get lost. Marika's eyes narrowed. Decided? By whom? A bunch of thugs in a back room. My father is the commissioner of police. My claim has the weight of the law. Yours has the stink of the gutter. The insult was delivered with surgical precision. Chitoge let out a low growl, her fists clenching. Why you little? Enough. Naruto's voice cut through the rising tension. It wasn't loud, but it silenced them both instantly. He looked at Marika, his blue eyes softening with something that wasn't pity, but a profound and serious concern. The others saw a love triangle drama. He saw a victim in desperate need of help. Tachibana-san, he said, his voice gentle. Your claim is a serious one. It deserves to be treated with respect, not argued about in a classroom. He turned to the rest of the class, who were all staring with undisguised fascination. Could you all give us a moment of privacy? It was a testament to the strange authority he projected that the students, even Shu, quickly and quietly filed out of the room, Ruri dragging a reluctant Kosaki with them. Soon, it was just the three of them. Naruto, a furious Chitoge, and a triumphant Marika. Now then, Marika said, her smile returning. As I was saying, Naruto-sama, your breathing is shallow. Naruto interrupted her. His gaze was fixed on her face. There's a slight tremor in your hands. Your skin, beneath the makeup, is pale. You project an image of perfect health, but you're in constant, low-level pain, aren't you? Marika froze. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned vulnerability. It was as if he had peeled back a dozen layers of her meticulously crafted persona and stared directly at her hidden agony. How did you know that? She whispered. I am observant, he said simply. He took a step closer. His presence not threatening, but calming. May I? He gestured to her wrist. Hesitantly, she extended her hand. Chitoge watched, bewildered, as Naruto's fingers gently encircled Marika's wrist. His thumb pressing lightly against her pulse point. He closed his eyes. To Chitoge, it looked like he was simply taking her pulse. But Naruto was doing something more. He focused, drawing a minuscule, almost undetectable thread of his ki, the potent life force that was the echo of his chakra, and channeled it into Marika's system. It wasn't a healing jutsu. That would be too overt, too draining. It was more like a diagnostic pulse, followed by a targeted wave of pure, calming energy. He wasn't attacking the curse. He was simply soothing the damage, reinforcing her ravaged life force from within. Like a bracing shore against a relentless tide, Marika gasped. A wave of warmth spread from her wrist up her arm, suffusing her entire body. It was a sensation she had never felt before. The constant, grinding ache in her joints that had been her companion since childhood simply dissolved. The persistent fatigue that clung to her like a shroud evaporated. The tight band of pain that always squeezed her chest loosened and vanished. For the first time in over a decade, she felt, well, not just better, not just a temporary reprieve from the pain. She felt a profound, foundational wellness. The static of her suffering was gone, and in its place was a clean, clear silence. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. She stared at Naruto, at his calm, focused face, and she understood. He wasn't just observant, he knew, and he had done something no doctor, no specialist, no amount of medicine had ever been able to do. He had given her a moment of peace. Her obsessive, storybook crush, born from a half-remembered childhood meeting and nurtured into a life-defining goal, underwent a seismic shift. The fantasy shattered, and in its place, something real and terrifyingly powerful crystallized. It was no longer about a promise. It was about the man in front of her. The only person in the world who had seen her true suffering and, without a word, had eased it. Her devotion, which had been a performance, became an unbreakable truth. Her affection, which had been an obsession, became a vow. She threw her arms around him again, this time not with the performative flair of before, but with the desperate gratitude of a drowning woman clinging to a lifeboat. She sobbed into his shirt, her entire body shaking with relief. Thank you, she wept. Thank you, thank you. Chitoge stood in stunned silence, utterly lost. 1 minute, this girl was a venomous rival. The next, she was a weeping mess, clinging to Naruto as if he were a god. What had he done? What had happened in that single touch? Naruto simply rested a hand on her back, letting her cry. He looked over her shaking shoulders and met Chitoge's confused, angry gaze. His expression was calm, but his eyes conveyed a silent message. It's more complicated than you think. The fake date was Chitoge's idea, or rather, her demand. If they were going to sell this ridiculous story, they needed to be seen in public. Her father had insisted. It was a miserable, rainy Saturday afternoon, and the last place Naruto wanted to be was a loud, crowded arcade in Shibuya, but it was part of the mission. The mission to maintain the peace. So, what's your game, pretty boy? Chitoge asked, her arms crossed as she surveyed the flashing lights and cacophony of electronic noise. She was trying to get under his skin. A project that had so far proven utterly fruitless. Something quiet and strategic. Shogi, go. I don't have a preference, Naruto said, his hands in his pockets. Of course you don't, she muttered. She pointed to a rhythm dance game. That one. Let's see your moves. She expected him to refuse, to be embarrassed. Instead, he just nodded. What followed was a masterclass in humiliation, though not for him. Chitoge, who was athletic and had good rhythm, was a strong player. But Naruto was something else. He didn't seem to be playing the game. He simply stepped on the arrows as they lit up. His movements economical and precise, his expression placid. He achieved a perfect combo without breaking a sweat, his score doubling hers. They moved to the claw machines. Chitoge spent 8,000 yen trying to get a fluffy alpaca plushie, the claw failing to grab it each time. Frustrated, she was about to kick the machine. "Allow me," Naruto said. He inserted a single coin. He didn't look at the prize. He watched the mechanics of the claw, the slight sway in its descent, the tension of the grip. He moved the joystick, pressed the button, and the claw descended, hooking the plushie's tag and lifting it cleanly. He handed it to her without a word. She stared at the alpaca, then at him. "How did you?" "The grip is strongest at the hinge," he said simply. "You just had to account for the pendulum swing." She was fuming. It was worse than him being bad at things. His effortless competence was a silent judgment on her own flailing efforts. She dragged him to a fighting game, her one area of expertise. She was a button masher, but a brutally effective one. "Let's go, hotshot," she growled, picking her favorite brawler. He picked a simple, balanced character. The match began. Chitoge unleashed a flurry of attacks. He simply blocked, a serene smile on his character's face. She hammered the controls, her frustration mounting. He just blocked, parried, and sidestepped. Finally, her character's special meter was full. She unleashed her ultimate move, a massive, screen-filling explosion. His character, in the split second before the attack landed, performed a single, perfectly timed counter. Her ultimate attack was nullified, and her character was thrown across the screen, defeated. Perfect-ko. Chitoge slammed her fists down on the console. "That's it. I've had enough of this. How are you good at everything? It's not normal." Naruto's gaze drifted past her, to a group of 3 men who had just entered the arcade. They wore the distinctive, garish jackets of a lesser beehive faction. One known for being more trouble than it was worth. They were loud, arrogant, and their eyes were scanning the room. They spotted Chitoge. A slow, greasy smile spread across the leader's face. "Well, well, well," the man said, sauntering over. "If it isn't the little princess. Heard you got yourself a new boyfriend. Trading down, are we?" His eyes roamed over Chitoge in a way that made her skin crawl. Chitoge's anger instantly shifted targets. "Get lost, Tanaka. I'm not in the mood." "Ooh, feisty," Tanaka chuckled, ignoring Naruto completely. "Look, your dad made a deal with those Yakuza fossils, fine. But that doesn't mean we have to respect it. Are you?" He's going soft. "Maybe it's time for a change in leadership." He took a step closer to her. Maybe someone with a little more ambition. Before Chitoge could even ball her fists, Naruto moved. He stepped between her and Tanaka, his body a relaxed but impassable barrier. "She asked you to leave," Naruto said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was flat, cold. Tanaka finally looked at him, laughing. "And who are you?" "Her bodyguard." He shoved at Naruto's chest. It was like shoving a stone statue. Naruto didn't budge. Tanaka's smile vanished. He tried to shove again, harder this time. Naruto's hand shot out and clamped around Tanaka's wrist. "I won't ask again," Naruto said, his voice a low whisper that was more menacing than any shout. Tanaka's 2 cronies moved in, reaching into their jackets. What happened next was a blur of brutal, silent efficiency. Naruto twisted Tanaka's wrist. There was a sharp snap. Tanaka screamed, a high-pitched, pathetic sound. Naruto used his momentum to spin him around and slam him face-first into the fighting game console. The screen cracked. He was already moving on the other 2. The first one pulled a knife. Naruto's hand chopped down on the man's forearm, and the knife clattered away. A palm heel strike to the sternum followed, knocking the wind out of him and sending him staggering back into a pinball machine, which erupted in a cacophony of bells and lights. The third man, seeing his friends go down, hesitated. It was a fatal mistake. Naruto closed the distance in an instant. He didn't strike. He simply placed his hand on the man's chest. The man froze, his eyes wide with a terror Chitoge had never seen before. He looked down, as if expecting a blow, but there was nothing. He just stood there, paralyzed. Naruto leaned in close, his voice a chilling murmur only the man could hear. "You will tell your friends. You will tell anyone who questions this truce. She is to be respected. The peace is to be respected. If I see any of you, or hear of any of you, Bothering her again, I will not be this gentle. He took his hand away. The man stumbled backward, tripped over his own feet, and scrambled away, dragging his groaning, injured friends with him. The entire arcade had fallen silent, all eyes on the scene. Naruto turned back to Chitoge. The cold, terrifying mask he had worn vanished as if it had never been there. He was just the quiet boy from class again. "Are you all right?" he asked. Chitoge stared at him, her heart pounding. The fight in the warehouse had been defensive. This was different. This was punitive. It was a calculated act of intimidation, executed with the precision of a surgeon and the brutality of a predator. I could have handled them," she stammered. The words sounding weak even to her own ears. It was an automatic, prideful response. Naruto met her gaze. His blue eyes were serious, and for the first time, she felt like he was truly seeing her. Not the gangster's daughter, not the fake girlfriend, but the person underneath. "I know you could have," he said, and his voice was completely sincere. "But you shouldn't have to. That's the point of this arrangement, isn't it? So you can just be a student. So you can try to get the alpaca from the claw machine and get angry when you lose at a video game. That's my job now, to handle them." He bent down and picked up the alpaca plushie, which she had dropped. He brushed a speck of dust off it and handed it back to her. Something shifted inside Chitoge's chest. For her entire life, protection had meant bodyguards and isolation. It had meant being treated like a fragile package. Naruto wasn't treating her like she was fragile. He was acknowledging her strength. But choosing to stand in front of her anyway, not because she was weak, but because he was strong enough to shoulder the burden for her. He was offering her not a cage, but a shield. A shield that would allow her, for the first time, a chance at a normal life. A faint blush rose to her cheeks. She snatched the alpaca from his hand, turning her face away so he couldn't see. "Whatever, bean sprout," she mumbled. "Don't think this means I like you." But as they walked out of the arcade, she stayed a little closer to him than before. Later that night, Naruto sat in the quiet solitude of his small dojo. The house was old, inherited from the kind but childless martial arts master who had adopted him as a boy. It was peaceful. The air smelled of old wood, tatami mats, and green tea. This was his sanctuary, the very embodiment of the quiet life he craved. He placed Raku's locket on the polished wooden floor. He closed his eyes, extending his senses, truly examining it for the first time. The fuinjutsu hummed under his touch. It was a sophisticated array, based on principles he recognized, but with a unique signature he'd never encountered. It was a seal of containment, but also a beacon. A lock, but also a keyhole of a much grander scale. It was designed to interact with other, similar energy signatures, the keys. He thought of the three girls now tangled in his life. Chitoge, her, gorilla. Strength wasn't just physical. Her life force was a roaring, untamed bonfire. A wellspring of raw, potent energy. A font of pure vitality. Strength. Marika, her life was a flickering candle, guttered by the parasitic curse latched onto her. But beneath that, her spirit, her actual will, was a diamond. Unbreakable, focused, and absolute in its intensity. Devotion. And Kosaki Onodera. He hadn't examined her key, but he could sense her from across a room. Her life force was different. It wasn't a bonfire or a diamond. It was clean, like a clear, deep spring. It was a gentle, passive energy, but it was profoundly, overwhelmingly pure. Purity, strength, devotion, purity, the components of the seal. The girls weren't just random childhood friends of Raku's. They were chosen, or their ancestors were. They were the inheritors of a sacred duty they didn't even know they had. And the locket was the mechanism meant to unite their power. And then he felt it again. The same chilling whisper he'd felt on the school roof. The scent of the void. The echo of the Otsutsuki. It was stronger this time, drawn by his probing of the fuinjutsu. He realized with a dawning horror that his own powerful, reincarnated soul was acting as an amplifier, making the dormant seal resonate, turning it from a silent lock into a singing beacon. He was the calamity. His very existence was waking up the ancient machinery. He snapped his senses back, severing his connection to the locket. The dojo was silent again, but the peace was gone. The quiet felt heavy, charged with menace. He stood up and walked to the door. looking out at the moonlit garden. The world was sleeping, unaware of the cosmic predator that was slowly turning its gaze toward their tiny, fragile planet. A predator drawn by a scent from its long-lost home. Drawn by him. A figure stepped out from the shadows of a maple tree. He was a young man, perhaps a few years older than Naruto, dressed in a sharp, modern, black suit that seemed to absorb the moonlight. His hair was dark, his features sharp and intelligent. He held a small, intricate, compass-like device in his hand, its needle spinning wildly as it pointed at Naruto. The man's eyes were cold, not with malice, but with the detached focus of a surgeon assessing a tumor. "It's even larger than our readings suggested," the man said, his voice calm and clear. "A spiritual anomaly of unprecedented scale. You radiate power like a miniature sun, Naruto Arisugawa. Or should I say, like a beacon." Naruto's body was relaxed, but every muscle was coiled, ready to spring. He recognized the man's posture. He was a trained killer, but not a thug. He moved with the deadly grace of a trained exorcist or mage. This was a new player. A far more dangerous one. "You have me at a disadvantage," Naruto said, using the same line he'd used with Marika, but this time his voice held no gentleness. It was a flat demand for information. The man gave a thin, humorless smile. "My name is Kato Ishikawa. I am a field commander for the Aegis Order. For centuries, my organization has protected this world from threats beyond its comprehension. We are the wall that stands against the darkness." He gestured with the compass. "And you, Naruto Arisugawa, are the brightest light this world has seen in millennia. A light that is about to attract a moth of apocalyptic proportions. You are a beacon for the devourer. A harbinger." Kato took a step forward, his eyes locking with Naruto's. There was no threat of immediate violence in his stance, but his words were a declaration of war. "The Order has a singular mission: to preserve the balance. To protect this world at any cost. And our calculations are clear. The only way to silence the beacon, the only way to save this world from the calamity your presence will inevitably invite." He paused, letting the weight of his final words land with the force of a death sentence. "Is to extinguish the light." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Hunter's Moon. Kato Ishikawa's words hung in the garden, colder than the moonlit air. Extinguish the light. It was a threat delivered with the dispassionate clarity of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. There was no malice in his eyes, only a grim, unshakable resolve. He was not a villain. He was a zealot, a man so convinced of his righteousness that he would sacrifice one to save the many without a moment's hesitation. Naruto's posture didn't change. He remained a study in stillness, a rock in the stream of Kato's pronouncements. His past life had been filled with men like this, men who saw the world in stark equations of sacrifice and the greater good. Danzo, Nagato, even Sasuke for a time. They were often more dangerous than those who craved simple destruction, for their cruel. Tai was wrapped in the comforting blanket of logic. "The Devourer," Naruto said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "A name for the Otsutsuki. Or is that what your order calls the Amatsu Mikabashi?" Kato's composure finally fractured. A flicker of genuine shock crossed his features. The compass in his hand wavered. How could you possibly know those names?" The Aegis Order's knowledge was ancient, fragmented, pieced together from half-legible scrolls and whispered histories passed down through generations. The Amatsu Mikabashi, the August Star of Heaven, was a forbidden name, a reference to a primordial entity of chaos. A devourer of worlds. The Otsutsuki were a footnote, a clan of celestial beings linked to the myth, believed to be long extinct or ascended. For this boy to speak both names so casually was like an uncontacted tribesman suddenly quoting Shakespeare. It was impossible. "I know many things," Naruto replied, his gaze unblinking. "I know that you are a censor, and a very good one. That device you hold is an amplifier, but you can feel my ki even without it. I know your order believes my existence is a threat. What you don't know is that I am the only one who truly understands what is coming. Extinguishing me will not silence the beacon. It will simply remove the only person capable of fighting the storm." Kato's face hardened, his shock replaced by suspicion. "Rhetoric. You are an anomaly, a power source of unknown origin and intent. You could be a willing herald for the devourer, for all we know. The order cannot take that risk. The world cannot take that risk." Then your order is short-sighted. Naruto stated, not as an insult, but as a fact. You feel my power, but can you not also feel its nature? It is not corrupt. It is not malevolent. It is life itself. Kato's expression became pained, as if he were arguing with himself. That's what makes you so dangerous. Your energy is pure, vital, and incredibly delicious. To the devourer, you are not a warning, you are a feast. A feast that will give it the power to consume this entire reality. Your good intentions are irrelevant. He raised a hand, and the air around him crackled with condensed energy. A shimmering blue field that warped the light. It was a potent, refined form of magic, different from chakra but similar in principle. Surrender yourself to the order, Arisugawa. We can place you in a stasis field, a pocket dimension where your energy will be shielded. It is a prison, but it is a gentle one. It is the only way. Naruto let out a soft, humorless breath. A cage. Men or Alwa. YS trying to put things they don't understand in cages. He finally moved, taking a single, deliberate step forward. I have spent one lifetime fighting for my freedom and the freedom of others. I will not surrender it in this one. Tell your order to stand down. Do not force my hand. The threat was implicit, delivered with the weight of a mountain. Kato saw the shift in Naruto's eyes, the placid blue hardening into something ancient and formidable. He saw a warrior king looking at a troublesome soldier. Kato lowered his hand, the energy field dissipating. This is not a debate. It is a statement of fact. We will come for you. And we will not be gentle. With that, he turned and melted back into the shadows from which he came, his presence vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Naruto stood alone in his garden. The silence returning, but the peace of his sanctuary was now irrevocably broken. The gangsters and the Yakuza had been a problem of this world. Kato and his Aegis Order a problem from a world that ran parallel to this one, a world of magic and monsters he had hoped to leave behind. And the Devourer, that was a ghost from his first life, a debt come due. The war had found him again. It had 3 fronts, and he was standing at the epicenter. The days that followed were thick with a new, unseen tension. Naruto's senses, honed by a lifetime of war and expanded by Sage Mode, were on high alert. He could feel them, the Watchers. They were discreet, positioned in alleyways, on rooftops, in parked cars blocks away from his home and the school. Aegis Order agents. They weren't attacking. They were observing, gathering intelligence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His routine didn't change. He walked to school with Chitoge. He ate lunch with her on the roof. He deflected Marika's increasingly theatrical displays of affection. He shared quiet, polite nods with Kosaki. He was a model student, a perfect fake boyfriend. But underneath, he was a coiled serpent. His every seemingly casual movement was a preparation, his every calm glance a scan for threats. The girls noticed the shift. You seem tense, Chitoge commented one afternoon as they walked home. She had grown accustomed to his unnerving calm, and its absence was more noticeable than an outright outburst. He was still quiet, but his silence was different now. It was the charged silence of a live wire. Just a lot on my mind. He replied evasively. Is it about that crazy girl? Chitoge pressed, referring to Marika. Because if she's bothering you, just say the word. I'll have a chat with her. Naruto gave a small, tired smile. Marika is the least of my worries. Marika, for her part, had become a permanent fixture. Her health had improved dramatically. The brief pulse of Kien Naruto had given her hadn't cured her curse, but it had suppressed it, feeding her own life force enough to fight back. The effect was temporary, and when the pain and fatigue began to creep back in after a few days, she sought him out. Her eyes wide with a quiet desperation. He had simply taken her hand, under the guise of a friendly greeting, and given her another dose. This created a cycle. Our devotion was now inextricably linked to the relief only he could provide. She didn't care about the fake relationship with Chitoge. She didn't care about propriety. Naruto-sama was her savior, her miracle. She would follow him to the ends of the earth, a fact she announced daily to anyone who would listen. Her father, the police commissioner, was baffled by her sudden bloom of health and her renewed obsession. But he was just happy to see his daughter well. He sent Naruto a ridiculously expensive fruit basket as a thank you for being a good influence. Kosaki Onodera watched it all from a safe distance. A quiet ache of confusion in her heart. She saw the way Kurisaki-san and Arisugawa-san walked together, a universe of tension between them. She saw how Tachibana-san orbited Arisugawa-san like a devoted moon. And she saw the exhaustion that now lived behind his calm blue eyes. He was carrying some immense burden, and he was carrying it alone. Her gentle soul yearned to ask, to help, but she was too shy. Too intimidated by the powerful personalities surrounding him. So she just watched, and worried. The Aegis Order chose their moment perfectly. It was the night of the summer festival. The air was warm and thick with the scent of takoyaki and grilled squid. The sky was a deep indigo, a perfect canvas for the fireworks to come. The streets were a vibrant, flowing river of people in colorful yukatas. For the first time, the group was together. Naruto had been coerced into going by Chitoge, who insisted it was a mandatory part of their performance. Marika had naturally invited herself along, arriving with her own security detail which Naruto politely but firmly dismissed, much to her pouty disappointment. And to everyone's surprise, they had run into Kosaki and Ruri near the cotton candy stand. After a moment of awkwardness, Chitoge, in a rare moment of social grace, had insisted they all hang out together. It was a picture of surreal normality. Chitoge and Marika curd over who got to walk next to Naruto. Ruri provided dry, sarcastic commentary. And Kosaki, caught in the middle, found herself walking beside Naruto, her heart fluttering. "It's very crowded," she said. Her voice barely a whisper over the din of the festival. "Stay close," Naruto replied, his presence a comforting shield against the press of the crowd. "It's easy to get separated." He seemed distracted, his gaze constantly scanning the rooftops, the alleyways, the faces in the crowd. Kosaki thought he was just being protective. She didn't realize he was tracking the hunters. He could feel them closing in. Their energy signatures like cold spots in the warm night. They were using the crowd as cover, forming a perimeter. They were going to make their move here. In public. Using the CHA-OS and the civilians as both cover and leverage. It was a ruthless, effective strategy. They found a small, grassy hill on the edge of the festival grounds, a popular spot to watch the fireworks. They spread out a blanket, and for a moment, a fragile peace settled over the mismatched group. Marika leaned against Naruto's arm. Chitoge sat on his other side, pretending to be annoyed but not moving away. Kosaki and Ruri sat opposite, watching the strange dynamic with fascination. The first firework hissed into the sky, a golden rocket that exploded into a magnificent chrysanthemum of light. The crowd gasped, then cheered. And in the brilliant, flashing light of the explosion, Naruto saw them. Figures on the surrounding rooftops. Men and women in dark, tactical gear, not modern military, but something older. They wore dark, flowing coats over reinforced fabric, and their faces were partially obscured by high collars and shadows. Some held strange, crossbow-like weapons. Others held short, glowing rods. Kato Ishikawa stood on the roof of a nearby shrine, his arms crossed, observing. The second firework went up, a cascade of glittering silver. As it burst, a net, woven from threads of pure, shimmering energy, shot down from the roof of a nearby apartment building. It was aimed directly at their small group. "Move." Naruto's voice was a whip crack of command. He grabbed Chitoge and Marika, pulling them back with him in a single, powerful motion. He twisted, shoving them behind him as the net hit the ground where they had been sitting, searing the grass and sizzling with contained power. Kosaki and Ruri screamed, scrambling backward. The attack had begun. From all sides, the Aegis hunters descended. They moved with silent, supernatural grace, dropping from rooftops and emerging from the shadows of the trees. They formed a circle, their weapons raised. Civilians, seeing the commotion and the glowing weapons, began to scream and run, creating a wave of panic that the hunters used to their advantage. Tightening their cordon, Naruto Arisugawa, Kato's amplified voice boomed from the shrine roof, cutting through the chaos. "This is your final chance. Surrender. Do not force us to escalate." Chitoge, her heart hammering, stared at the circle of hunters. "Who are these people? What do they want?" "Me," Naruto said, his eyes scanning the attackers, calculating angles, threats, and escape routes. His mind was a whirlwind of tactical analysis, a muscle memory from 1,000 battles kicking in. One of the hunters, a woman with a grim face and a glowing rod in each hand, lunged forward. She was fast, inhumanly so. Naruto met her charge. He didn't have time for subtlety. He needed to end this, and he needed to protect the girls. As she thrust with the energy rods, he did something that shattered their understanding of reality. He blurred. One moment, there was one Naruto Arisugawa. The next, there were three. Poof, poof. Two perfect copies of him appeared in puffs of white smoke. Standing back to back with the original Shadow Clone Jutsu, he murmured, the name a forgotten ghost on his tongue. The effect on the attackers, and the girls, was profound. The hunter skidded to a halt, her eyes wide with disbelief. Marika gasped. Kosaki's hands flew to her mouth. Chitoge just stared, her brain refusing to process what she was seeing. 3 Narutos. Identical. Real. Solid. What is that? Chitoge whispered, her voice trembling. A trick I know, the original Naruto said, not looking at her. His gaze was locked on the enemy. He gave his clones a mental command. A stream of information faster than any spoken word. Protect them. Create an opening. West. Go. One clone moved instantly, appearing in front of Kosaki and Ruri, who were the most exposed. He adopted a defensive stance, his eyes scanning for threats. The other clone turned to Chitoge and Marika. Stay behind me, it said, its voice identical to the original's. The original Naruto launched himself forward, a blonde streak of motion aimed directly at the hunter who had faltered. He moved with the explosive force he had kept so carefully restrained. He slammed into her, his shoulder checking her off balance. He didn't strike to kill or maim. He struck at her weapon, a precise hand-edge blow that shattered the glowing rod. Then he spun, a low sweep kicking her legs out from under her. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence. The other hunters recovered from their shock and surged forward. The battle was joined. It was chaos. The night was a strobe light of exploding fireworks and the crackling blue energy of Aegis weaponry. The clone defending Kosaki and Ruri was a defensive master, deflecting energy bolts with his bare hands, the impacts creating sharp, sizzling sounds. He never attacked, simply moved to intercept every threat aimed at the two terrified girls. The second clone fought alongside the original, a perfectly synchronized dance of destruction. They moved with a shared mind, anticipating each other's actions. One would block, the other would strike. They flowed around the hunters, a two-man army. But the girls were not helpless bystanders. Chitoge, her fear burned away by a surge of adrenaline, acted on instinct. A hunter tried to flank the original Naruto while he was engaged with two others. Look out, she screamed, and without thinking, she grabbed He picnic blanket and hurled it like a net. It was a clumsy, desperate move, but her gorilla strength gave it surprising force. The heavy blanket tangled around the hunter's head and arms, momentarily blinding and binding him. It was the opening Naruto needed. He disengaged from his two opponents, spun, and dropped the tangled hunter with a single, precise chop to the back of the neck. He glanced at Chitoge, a flicker of approval in his eyes. She felt a jolt, a surge of pride. She wasn't useless. Marika, meanwhile, was using her own unique skills. Her mind, no longer clouded by constant pain, was sharp and analytical. She had her phone out, not to record, but with a map of the area open. Naruto-sama, she yelled, her voice cutting through the din. The west exit is a bottleneck. They'll have it blocked. There's a service path behind the shrine, it leads to the river. It's our only way out. She had spent years under the watchful eye of police protection. She knew how to think about security, escape routes, and ambushes. On the shrine roof, Kato watched the battle unfold with growing disbelief. Clones. The anomaly could create solid, autonomous duplicates of himself. It was a strategic and tactical nightmare. His hunters, some of the most elite exorcists in the world, were being dismantled. Not killed, but systematically and efficiently disarmed and neutralized. Arisugawa was holding back, immensely. He was fighting a defensive battle, trying to escape, not win. The thought was chilling. Kosaki, huddled behind the stoic defense of the shadow clone, was terrified beyond words. But as a stray energy bolt flew past her clone defender and sizzled against a tree near her, something inside her snapped. She clutched at her chest, her fingers brushing against the small lump. In her pocket where she'd tucked away her house key. But it wasn't her house key her fingers found. It was the other one. The one from her memory box. The promise key. Driven by pure, unthinking terror for her friends, for Ruri. For the kind boy who was fighting an army for them, she squeezed the key in her fist. She squeezed it with all the fear and all the desperate hope in her heart. A light erupted from her hand. It wasn't an explosion. It was a soft, gentle, but absolutely blinding wave of pure, white gold radiance. It had no heat, no force, but it was spiritually overwhelming. Every Aegis hunter in its radius cried out, staggering back, their hands flying to their eyes. Their connection to their magical energy wavered, their weapons flickering. It was like dousing a flame with pure water. The spiritual purity of Kosaki's life force, amplified by the key, was a flashbang to their refined but spiritually narrower senses. Naruto and his clones, whose energy was natural and of this world, were unaffected. This was the opening. Now, the original Naruto roared. The clone defending Kosaki grabbed her and Ruri. The other clone grabbed a stunned Chitoge and a determined Marika. The original Naruto moved to the front, clearing a path through the disoriented hunters. They ran, not west, but towards the shrine, following Marika's direction. Kato, shielded by the shrine's roof, was the only one unaffected by the light. He watched them escape, his face a mask of cold fury and dawning horror. The girl, Onodera, she was another anomaly. A source of immense spiritual purity connected to one of the legendary keys. This wasn't a simple extraction anymore. This was a catastrophe. Arisugawa wasn't just a beacon. He was a nexus, a focal point around which other anomalies were beginning to awaken. He had to be stopped. At any cost. They burst out of the trees behind the shrine, their lungs burning, and skidded to a halt on the muddy bank of the river. The sounds of the festival and the pursuit were fading behind them. They were safe, for the moment. The shadow clones, their duty done, dispersed in puffs of smoke. The information, the experience, the exhaustion of their effort. TS flooded back into the original Naruto. He stumbled, leaning against a tree to catch his breath. The girls stared at him, their chests heaving. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by shock and 1,000 questions. Chitoge was the first to speak, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and awe. Clones. You can make clones of yourself. Marika was looking at him with wide, shining eyes. You were magnificent. Naruto-sama, a divine warrior. Kosaki just looked at her own hand, the one that had held the key, as if it belonged to someone else. Ruri was silently trying to process the impossible events through a lens of scientific logic and failing completely. The fragile piece of their high school lives was gone, shattered like a firework against the night sky. The fake relationship, the romantic rivalries, it all seemed like a childish game from another lifetime. This was real. The men with glowing weapons were real. The danger was real. Naruto pushed himself off the tree. He looked at the three of them, Chitoge, who had fought beside him, Marika, who had guided their escape, Kosaki, who had saved them all with a power she didn't understand. They weren't liabilities. They were the only people in this world who had seen the truth of him, the only ones who had stood with him when the walls of reality came crashing down. The fake relationship was dead. The lie was over. He looked at them, his gaze serious and heavy with the weight of his 2 lives. We need to go, he said, his voice low and urgent. My house. It's the only place we'll be safe for now. He took a step, then paused, looking back at their stunned, questioning faces. He knew he owed them an explanation. He knew that from this moment on, their lives were tied to his in a way none of them could have predicted. He made a new vow then. Not a flimsy contract between gangsters, but a pact born of fire and desperation. A promise whispered to the indifferent night. I'll protect you, Naruto Uzumaki said. And in his heart, he added the unspoken second half of that vow. And you, whether you know it or not, will protect me. Together, they disappeared into the darkness of the city, no longer just classmates, but fugitives bound by a shared, impossible secret. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Serpent in the Garden. The silence in Naruto's dojo was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The air, usually so peaceful with the scent of old wood and tatami, was now thick with unspoken questions and the low thrum of adrenaline fading into bone-deep exhaustion. They had made it back from the river, moving through the city's shadowed backstreets with a tense, darting urgency. Naruto's senses had been stretched to their limit, a constant, sweeping sonar searching for the cold spots of Aegis energy, but the hunters had not pursued. For now, Ruri Miyamoto was the first to break the silence. Her voice, usually so clipped and certain, was strained. "Okay," she said, her gaze fixed on Naruto. "Okay, let's start with the clones. Solid light projections, advanced holography, or are we talking biological duplication? Because the energy expenditure for mitosis on that scale would be," she trailed off, her scientific mind crashing against the rocks of the impossible. "They were real," Chitoge stated, her voice flat. She was sitting seiza on a tatami mat, her fists clenched in her lap. She had seen one take a blow meant for Kosaki. She had felt the solidness of the one that had grabbed her. They were solid. "I saw it. He was like a god from the stories my grandmother used to tell," Marika whispered, her eyes filled with pure adoration. Never leaving Naruto's face, she had completely bypassed confusion and landed directly on worship. Kosaki was pale, staring at the ornate key she now held in her trembling hand. The key she had grabbed in a moment of sheer panic. It felt warm to the touch, humming with a faint, residual energy. "The light," she murmured. "I don't know how I did that. It just happened." Naruto stood before them, a pot of tea brewing on a small stove in the corner, the simple, domestic action a stark contrast to the evening's chaos. He looked at each of them, at their fear, their awe, their confusion. The walls he had built around himself were gone, torn down not by the enemy, but by the necessity of protecting these girls. The quiet life was a distant dream. This was his reality now. He poured 4 cups of tea, the clinking of porcelain the only sound. He placed a cup before each of them. "It's not a trick," he said, his voice calm, grounding. He finally sat down, facing them. "The clones are a part of me. A technique from my past." He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man defusing a bomb. "And what you did, Onodera-san, that was a part of you. A power you've always had, but never had a reason to use." He looked at the key in her hand. "That key, and the one Tachibana-san has, and the locket I carry, they aren't just jewelry. They are conduits, amplifiers. Your families were once part of an ancient lineage of guardians." Ruri's eyes narrowed. "Guardians of what?" "A seal," Naruto said. "A seal to protect this world from things like the Devourer Kato mentioned." He decided against using the names Otsutsuki or Amatsu Mikabashi. The truth needed to be given in survivable doses. "The Aegis Order believes my presence is aggravating that seal, drawing the Devourer's attention. They think removing me will solve the problem." "And will it?" Chitoge asked, her gaze sharp and penetrating. "No," Naruto said with absolute certainty. "It will leave this world defenseless when it arrives." The weight of that statement settled in the room. This wasn't about a gang war or a high school rivalry anymore. This was about the end of the world. "So what now?" Chitoge demanded. "Those Order people will come for you again. For us, we can't go home. We can't go to the police. Tachibana's dad is the commissioner, but what can he do against people who use magic? My father would believe me," Marika declared fiercely. "He would deploy the entire force to protect you, Naruto-sama. And they would be massacred," Naruto said, his voice gentle but firm. "This isn't a fight for conventional forces. The Aegis Order is a global organization. They are disciplined, powerful, and they believe they are saving the world. They will not stop." A grim silence fell. They were fugitives, hunted by a secret army of sorcerers. It was a hopeless situation. "So we hide?" Ruri asked, her pragmatic mind searching for a viable strategy. "Disappear? That seems statistically improbable, given their resources." "We don't hide," Naruto said, a new hardness in his voice. "We get an army of our own." He looked at Chitoge. She understood instantly. Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious. You want to go to my dad. And Raku's dad. You want to bring the beehive and the Shuegumi into this." "They owe me a favor," Naruto said simply. "I upheld their truce. I protected your father. More importantly, they have resources the Aegis Order can't easily track. Safe houses, Smuggling routes. A network of eyes and ears on the street. They are the shadows the Order's light doesn't touch. They can hide us. Give us time to figure out our next move. They're criminals. Chitoge shot back, the irony not lost on her. They'll kill each other. The truce is barely holding as it is. It will hold, Naruto said, his gaze unwavering, because I will be there to enforce it. And because now, they have a common enemy. An enemy that attacked their city and threatened their heirs. Nothing unites rivals like a threat from the outside. It was a mad plan. A desperate gamble, to seek sanctuary with two warring criminal empires. But as they looked at Naruto's calm, resolute face, they realized it was the only plan they had. The meeting took place in the same rust and brine-scented warehouse where it had all begun. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. There was no posturing, no open hostility. There was only shock and a heavy, simmering anger. Adelt Kurisaki and the Shuegumi Oyabun sat in their respective chairs, but their eyes were fixed on the small group standing in the center of the floor. Naruto, Chitoge, Marika, Kosaki, and Ruri. A collection of high school students who looked wildly out of place. Chitoge had just finished recounting the night's events, her voice still shaking with residual fury. She left out the clones and Kosaki's burst of light, describing them only as unusual tactics, and a blinding flash, but she detailed the coordinated attack, the energy weapons, and the threat against Naruto. Adelt's jovial mask was gone. His face was a thundercloud. These, Aegis Order, cowards attacked my daughter. In a public festival, he roared, slamming his fist on the arm of his chair. Raku's father was quieter, but his rage was a palpable force. They operated in our city, under our noses. This is an insult to us both. Naruto stepped forward. This was not an attack on your families, he said, his voice cutting through their anger. It was an attack on me. Your daughters were caught in the crossfire because they were with me. The Aegis Order will not stop until they have me. They will tear this city apart to get to me, and they do not care who gets in their way. He let that sink in. He wasn't asking for help as a victim. He was presenting them with a mutual problem. I need sanctuary, Naruto continued. A place where my friends and I can stay, where the Order cannot easily find us. And I need information. I need to know everything your networks can dig up about a secret organization of mages operating worldwide. Adelt looked at the Shuegumi leader, a silent question passing between them. The old Yakuza boss took a long drag from his cigar, the ember glowing in the dim light. You upheld your end of our bargain, Arisugawa-kun, the Oyabun said, his voice a low growl. You have proven your strength and your honor. The Shuegumi does not abandon its allies. You will have our protection. Adelt grinned, a feral, dangerous expression. The beehive stands with you too, kid. Nobody messes with my little girl and gets away with it. We'll put our ears to the ground. If these Aegis spooks are in our city, we'll find them. Claude, who had been standing behind Chitoge, looked at Naruto with a new, complex expression. The hatred was still there, but it was now mingled with a grudging, undeniable respect. This boy had not only protected Chitoge, he had just united the two most powerful criminal factions in the city under his banner. The alliance was forged, a strange, unholy trinity of high school students, Yakuza, and gangsters against an ancient order of holy warriors. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and logistics. The group was moved to a high-end, discreet hotel owned by a Shuegumi front corporation. The entire top floor was cleared out, guarded by a mix of stoic Yakuza in Utes and jumpy beehive gangsters in leather. It was a tense, oil and water arrangement, with old rivalries simmering just beneath the surface. Only Naruto's presence kept the peace. He would walk the halls, his calm gaze washing over the guards, and the tension would visibly dissipate. They had all heard the stories of the warehouse. They all knew who was in charge. The girls were confined to the luxurious prison of the hotel suite. Ruri, ever the academic, became the information hub, collating the intel pouring in from the two gangs, networks on a new, encrypted laptop. Marika used her father's influence in a more subtle way. She couldn't tell him the truth, but she could request information, citing concerns about new, extremist cults, operating in the city. Commissioner Tachibana, eager to please his newly healthy daughter, put his best detectives on it, unwittingly feeding intelligence to the very people he was supposed to be arresting. Chitoge acted as the liaison, using her status to speak directly with the top lieutenants of both factions, cutting through the usual chain of command to get unfiltered reports. She found she had a talent for it, her sharp tongue and intimidating presence proving surprisingly effective in managing hardened criminals. Kosaki found her own role. The guards, the hotel staff, the low-level members, they were all terrified, caught up in a shadow war they didn't understand. Kosaki, with her gentle nature and disarming kindness, would talk to them. She'd bring them tea, ask about their families, and just listen. She became the heart of the operation, a source of calm that soothed frayed nerves and reminded everyone what they were fighting for, a return to normalcy. Despite the united front, something was wrong. The Aegis Order's movements were too precise. Twice, they attempted a raid on a supposed safe house, only to be thwarted at the last minute by Naruto, who had sensed the attack coming and had the location evacuated. The second time was too close. The hunters had known the exact floor, the exact layout. They had a leak. It's the only explanation, Naruto said, standing before a large map of the city in their suite's living room. The girls were gathered around him. Their intel is too good. Someone inside this alliance is feeding them information. A chill went through the room. They were in a fortress, surrounded by allies, but one of them was a traitor. It could be anyone, Chitoge said, her expression grim. Decades of bad blood between our families. There are hundreds of guys out there who would sell out the other side for a chance at revenge. That's the obvious assumption, Ruri countered, tapping at her keyboard. Which might be what the traitor wants us to think. A beehive member betraying the Shuegumi, or vice versa. It could be simpler. It could just be about money. The Aegis Order is ancient and global. Their pockets must be deep. Or they were promised something more, Naruto said quietly, his MI. Going back to Kato's zealous conviction. They wouldn't just use money. They'd use ideology. They'd find someone who already hates the criminal underworld and offer them a chance to burn it all down. The paranoia was poison. The guards started looking at each other with suspicion. Minor scuffles broke out in the hallways, old grievances bubbling to the surface. The alliance was starting to fray at the seams. Naruto knew a direct investigation would be fruitless. No one would talk. Trying to use his sensory abilities to read the emotions of hundreds of gangsters and yakuza would be like Ying to find a single sour note in a death metal concert. The traitor, whoever they were, would be masked by a sea of general animosity and fear. He had to rely on his team. Chitoge, he said, turning to her. Talk to the lieutenants. Both sides. Float a rumor that we know there's a traitor and we're close to finding them. Watch how they react. See who gets nervous, who gets angry, who tries too hard to be helpful. Marika, he continued, your father's people, can they run background checks? Not just criminal records, financials. Look for sudden windfalls, unusual payments. And cross-refer. NCE them with the families of the main players. The order might not have paid the traitor directly. Ruri, go through all the intel we've gathered. Ignore the content. Analyze the source. Who brought us the tip that led to the first safe house? Who vetted the second one? Look for a pattern in the information flow itself. The girls nodded, their faces grim but determined. They had their assignments. What about me? Kosaki asked, her voice small. She felt useless, unable to play the games of intrigue and analysis. Naruto looked at her, and his expression softened. You have the most important job, Onodera-san. Keep doing what you're doing. Talk to people, the ones no one else notices. The drivers, the cooks, the cleaning staff. The wives and children of the members who visit. A secret is a heavy thing to carry. People who carry heavy things get tired. They get careless. They might say something to someone they think is harmless. Kosaki's eyes widened. He wasn't sidelining her. He was giving her a real mission. One that suited her strengths perfectly. A warmth spread through her chest. I will, she said, her voice full of a newfound resolve. The hunt began. It was a tense, silent war fought in whispers, glances, and lines of code. Chitoge played the part of the angry, suspicious princess, putting the fear of God into hardened killers. Marika fed quiet requests to her father's most trusted analyst. framing it as a school project on corporate espionage. Ruri's fingers flew across her keyboard, her eyes scanning endless lines of data, her mind a whirlwind of pattern recognition. And Kosaki talked. She learned that one of the Shuegumi guards had a daughter who loved the same manga as her. She helped one of the beehive drivers pick out an anniversary gift for his wife. He listened to an old Yakuza accountant complain about his rheumatism. She became a quiet, trusted presence, a safe harbor in the paranoid storm. 3 days later, she found him. It was an old man named Kenji Tanaka, a bookkeeper for the Shuegumi for over 40 years. He was a respected elder, almost family to the Oyabun. Kosaki had found him sitting alone in the hotel's deserted garden, staring at a small, framed photograph. She had brought him a cup of tea. They talked for a while about the weather, about the flowers. Then he showed her the picture. It was of his wife and young son. "They're gone," he said, his voice raspy with old grief. 20 years ago, we were shopping. A car chase. Rival gangs shooting at each other. A stray bullet went through the window of the bakery we were in. His hand, holding the photo, trembled. My boy. He was 6. He died in my arms. Kosaki's heart broke. She didn't know what to say. She just sat with him, sharing his silence. This world, he finally whispered, his voice thick with a lifetime of hate. This world of honor and duty, it's a lie. It's a garden of serpents that poisons everything it touches. It took my family. It took my life. He looked at Kosaki, his eyes filled with a terrible, weary clarity. Then they came to me. The people in black. They knew my story. They said they were gardeners. They said they were here to pull the weeds. To burn the serpents from the garden. They offered me justice. An end to the Shuegumi, the beehive, all of it. A world where no other 6-year-old boy would die in his father's arms over a turf war. He looked down at his hands. All I had to do was tell them where you were. A small price to pay, for a clean garden. Kosaki felt a cold dread wash over her. This wasn't a monster. This was a broken man, drowning in grief. Later that night, the leaders were assembled in the suite. Adelt, the Oyabun, their top lieutenants, Claude, and old man Tanaka, standing in the center of the room, his shoulders slumped. Naruto stood beside him, his expression unreadable. Kosaki stood near the back, tears silently streaming down her face. The Oyabun's face was a mask of cold fury and deep, personal betrayal. Tanaka. After all these years. You were my brother. You were no brother of mine. Tanaka spat, his grief finally boiling over into rage. Your world killed my family. You speak of honor while your men shoot up city streets. The lieutenants surged forward, hands reaching for their weapons. He's a traitor. Let us deal with him, Oyabun. Wait. Naruto's voice cut through the anger. It was quiet, but it stopped everyone cold. He walked over to Tanaka. He didn't look at him with anger or judgment. He looked at him with a profound, aching empathy that Tanaka had not seen in 20 years. Your grief is a weapon, Naruto said softly. The Aegis Order knew that. They sharpened it and aimed it at us. But the weapon is not the problem. The wound is. He turned to the stunned Yakuza and gangsters. He is not your enemy. Your enemy is a world where a man can lose his family to a stray bullet and have no recourse but vengeance. You talk of honor, but where was the honor in his family's death? You talk of strength, but were you strong enough to heal his pain? Silence. The hardened criminals looked away, unable to meet Naruto's gaze. He was holding up a mirror to their world, and the reflection was ugly. Punishing him will change nothing, Naruto said. It will only prove him right. It will only create another cycle of violence and grief. He looked back at Tanaka. But letting you walk away is not justice either. Your actions endangered people I have sworn to protect. He paused, the solution coming to him, a path that was not about vengeance or forgiveness, but about restoration. You want to burn down the garden, Naruto said. So be it, but you will do it from the inside, and you will do it my way. He turned back to the leaders. He will no longer be your bookkeeper. From now on, he answers to me. He will use his knowledge of your organizations, every dirty secret, every weakness, every injustice, to help me reform them. We will create a new fund, bankrolled by both your families. Dedicated to the victims of your war. A fund he will manage. He will spend the rest of his life making amends, not with blood, but by rebuilding what your world has broken. It was an audacious proposal. A revolutionary one. It was not Yakuza justice. It was not gangster justice. It was Naruto's justice. Tanaka stared at him, his mouth agape. He had expected death. He was being offered purpose. A chance to turn his decades of hate into something meaningful. Tears streamed down his wrinkled face. He fell to his knees, his body racked with sobs, the grief of 20 years finally breaking free. The Oyabun and adult looked at each other. They looked at the weeping old man. And they looked at the blonde teenager who commanded the room not with threats or power, but with a terrifying moral clarity. In that moment, their loyalty, which had been a strategic calculation, solidified into something far deeper. It became respect. It became awe. Naruto had not only found the serpent in the garden. He had defanged it and taught it to tend the flowers. But as the immediate crisis resolved, a new, more terrifying one began. Ruri, who had been silently working on her laptop, let out a sharp gasp. Naruto, she said, her voice tight with alarm. I've been tracking the Aegis Order's energy signatures, trying to find a pattern. They aren't just hunting us anymore. They're gathering. She turned the laptop around. It showed a map of the city, dotted with dozens of small, blue markers representing Aegis agents. But now, those markers were all converging on a single point. They're all moving to one location. Ruri said, in force. Chitoge leaned in, her eyes widening as she recognized the area. That's Onodera's neighborhood. Marika pulled up a satellite image on her own device. Specifically, they're surrounding her family's shop. Kosaki's blood ran cold. My mother, she's there alone. Naruto was already moving, his face a mask of cold fury. They had gone after his friends. They had hunted him. He had tolerated it, but now they were targeting an innocent. They had crossed a line. They aren't trying to capture me anymore, he said, his voice dangerously low as he strode towards the door. They're trying to draw me out. He turned back to them, his blue eyes blazing with a light they had never seen before. It was not the warmth of kindness or the coldness of a warrior. It was the incandescent rage of a protector whose flock was threatened. They've just made a very big mistake. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Cracks in Reality. The Onodera patisserie was a cornerstone of its neighborhood. It was a place of warmth, of gentle greetings and the sweet, comforting aroma of azuki bean paste and toasted mochi. It was a pocket of the old world, a bastion of simple, handcrafted quality in an age of mass production. To its customers, it was a treasure. To Kosaki, it was home. To the Aegis Order, it was bait. Mrs. Onodera, a woman with the same gentle eyes as her daughter, hummed a quiet tune as she wiped down the polished wooden counter. It was a slow evening, the street outside quiet as dusk settled over the city. She glanced at the clock, a warm smile gracing her lips. Kosaki would be home soon. She worried about her daughter, who had been so secretive lately, staying with her study group in a hotel for days. But she trusted Kosaki. She trusted her friends. The Kurisaki girl was intense, and the Tachibana girl was a bit dramatic, but that Arisugawa boy, there was a goodness in him, a quiet strength that put a mother's heart at ease. A flicker of movement outside the large front window caught her eye. A man in a dark coat was standing across the street, staring at the shop. Then she saw another, further down, half hidden in the mouth of an alley. A cold prickle of unease traced its way down her spine. These weren't customers. They didn't belong. The bell above the door chimed softly. Kato Ishikawa stepped inside. He looked different from when Naruto had seen him in the garden. He was no longer just an assessor. He was a field commander on a mission. He wore the same dark, flowing coat as his hunters, and his face was set in grim lines of purpose. He let his gaze sweep over the shop, taking in the neat rows of sweets, the clean counters, the gentle, homey atmosphere. He felt a pang of something he quickly suppressed. Regret. This was a place of peace. And he was about to shatter it. May I help you, Mrs. Onodera asked, her voice polite but strained. The man's intensity was unnerving. I am looking for Naruto Arisugawa, Kato said, his voice even. We have reason to believe he will be coming here. Arisugawa-san, I'm afraid you've missed him. He's with my daughter, she replied, her maternal instinct screaming at her to protect, to deflect. Kato gave a small, sad smile. Please, madam, do not lie. It does not suit you. We know your daughter is not here. We know you are alone. And we know he will come for you. Mrs. Onodera's blood ran cold. This wasn't a casual inquiry. This was a threat. She slowly began to back away towards the phone in the kitchen. I will only say this once, Kato continued, his voice hardening. When he arrives, do not interfere. My business is with him. You and your shop are merely leverage. Suddenly, the air in the shop grew heavy, thick and charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The lights flickered violently. A low, guttural growl echoed from the street outside, a sound that didn't belong to any animal. Mrs. Onodera froze, her eyes wide with terror. Kato spun around, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of the short, blade-like wand at his belt. What is this? He hissed, his senses screaming at him. This wasn't Aegis energy. This was something else, something foul. The glass of the front window began to vibrate, then spiderweb cracks spread across its surface. Through the fractured pane, they could see the streetlights flickering and dying, plunging the neighborhood into a sickly, purple-tinged twilight. The man Kato had posted across the street was gone. In his place was a creature that defied sanity. It was vaguely canine in shape, but it was made of shifting, solidified shadow and raw malice. It was the size of a bear, with too many joints in its legs, and its head was a mass of swirling darkness from which dozens of glowing, malevolent red eyes stared out. It dripped a black, viscous ichor that sizzled and steamed when it hit the pavement, dissolving the asphalt like acid. It was a thing of nightmares, a predator from a dimension of madness. Kato stared, his training and centuries of Aegis lore giving it a name. A hollow hound, he breathed, a note of pure disbelief in his voice. It's too soon. The veil isn't weak enough yet. The Hound of the Void, a lesser servitor of the Devourer, sniffed the air, its many eyes fixing on the Onodera patisserie. It had been drawn here, not by Naruto, but by the faint, lingering resonance of the key's power, by Kosaki's essence, which clung to this place like a perfume. It was also drawn by the concentration of refined spiritual energy from the Aegis hunters. To the Hound, this place was a smorgasbord. It let out a reality-bending howl, and the window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Mrs. Onodera screamed, scrambling back as the creature began to force its massive, unnatural form through the doorway, splintering the frame. Kato reacted instantly. Sanctus Clypeus, he yelled, drawing his wand and slashing it through the air. A shield of shimmering blue light erupted between the monster and Mrs. Onodera. The Hound slammed into it, and the shield buckled, cracks appearing in its surface. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. He had brought his hunters here to trap a man. He had instead rung the dinner bell for a monster. Naruto was a golden blur. He moved through the city with a speed that defied human limits. The girls, bundled into a reinfork, Ed van driven by one of the Shueigumi's best drivers, were far behind. He had given them a simple, direct order: get Onodera's mother out. Secure the area. Do not engage. He couldn't wait for them. Every second mattered. He had pushed his physical abilities to their absolute limit, his legs pumping, the wind screaming past his ears. But it wasn't enough. He could feel it. The wrongness. A tear in the fabric of his world. Stinking of the void. It was centered on Kosaki's home. He needed more speed. He channeled ki to his feet, a foundational ninja skill he hadn't used in this life. His feet stuck to the side of a building. And he ran, horizontally at first, then straight up, his path a gravity-defying line. He hit the roof, not breaking stride, and launched himself into the air, leaping from rooftop to rooftop. The city became a concrete parkour course beneath his flying feet. As he got closer, he saw the sickly purple twilight corrupting the sky. He heard the shriek of the Hound. He saw the flicker of Aegis shields. His heart hammered in his chest, a cold dread mixing with his rage. He was too late. The battle had already begun. He landed on a roof overlooking the street. The scene was worse than he imagined. The Aegis hunters, who had been setting a trap for him, were now locked in a desperate battle for their lives. 3 of them lay broken on the street, their shields shattered. The others were fighting a losing battle against 2 more hounds that had manifested, drawn by the chaos. These things were fast, unnaturally strong, and their very presence seemed to warp the physical world around them. And the first hound, the largest one, was relentlessly smashing against a flickering blue shield inside the Onodera patisserie. Behind the shield, he could see Kato Ishikawa, his face pale with strain. And a terrified Mrs. Onodera huddled behind him. The protector in Naruto, the Hokage, roared to life. These Aegis agents were his enemies. They had hunted him. They had threatened his friends. But they were also human beings fighting a monster to protect an innocent. In this moment, there was no choice to be made. He gathered his ki, the pure, potent life force of his new body, and molded it. It had been decades, a lifetime ago, but his hands remembered. His soul remembered. He brought his right hand up, pouring energy into his palm, forcing it to rotate, to compress, to take shape. Rotation, power, containment, the three stages, the legacy of his master, and of his father. A spiraling sphere of violent, blue energy formed in his hand, whining like a miniature typhoon. The sound was alien in this world, a violation of its physics. The Rasengan. He held the condensed storm in his palm and leapt. He descended from the rooftop like a meteor. The hound inside the shop reared back, its shadowy claws raised to deliver the final, shattering blow to Kato's failing shield. Get away from her. Naruto's roar was the cry of a vengeful god. He fell upon the creature's back, driving the Rasengan deep into its amorphous, shadowy flesh. The impact was not an explosion. It was an annihilation. The Rasengan didn't cut or burn. It ground. It tore. It ripped the very essence of the hollow hound apart on a spiritual level. The creature let out a silent, soul-wrenching scream as a vortex of energy erupted from its back, vaporizing a third of its body instantly. It stumbled forward, its form flickering and dissolving, before collapsing into a pool of black ichor that quickly evaporated into nothingness. Naruto landed lightly on the floor of the shop, the loss. Chi vestiges of the Rasengan dissipating from his hand. He stood over the spot where the monster had been, his back to Kato and Mrs. Onodera, his body radiating an aura of immense, terrifying power. The shop was a wreck. The front was gone. The counters were overturned. Broken pottery and scattered sweets littered the floor. But it was silent. He turned slowly. Kato Ishikawa stared at him, his face a mask of utter, soul-shaking awe and terror. He hadn't just seen a powerful technique. He had seen a concept. A fundamental force of the universe wielded as a weapon. He had seen something that should not exist. Naruto's gaze went past him to Mrs. Onodera, who was staring at him, her eyes wide with fear, not of the monster, but of him. Of the boy who had just held a miniature hurricane in his hand. At that moment, the van screeched to a halt outside. Chitoge, Marika, and Kosaki burst out, followed by Claude and a squad of armed beehive gangsters. They saw the destruction, the two remaining hounds battling the battered Aegis agents in the street, and Naruto standing in the ruins of the shop. "Mom!" Kosaki screamed, rushing forward. She ran past Naruto, past a stunned Kato, and threw her arms around her mother. Chitoge and Marika stood in the doorway, their eyes fixed on Naruto. They had seen his impossible speed, his clones, his combat prowess. But this was different. The raw, world-breaking power of the Rasengan had left a lingering ozone in the air, a spiritual echo that made their hair stand on end. This wasn't just a fighter. This wasn't just a boy with tricks. This was something else entirely. The two remaining hounds, their primary target annihilated, turned their attention to the newcomers. One of them charged the shop. Claude and his men opened fire, their automatic weapons chattering. But the bullets passed through the creature's shadowy form with little effect, only making it angrier. Naruto moved again. He appeared in the ruined doorway, a blur of motion. "Stay back," he commanded. He didn't have time to form another Rasengan. He dropped into a low stance, his hands flashing through a series of seals that was pure, ingrained instinct. It was a simple technique, but one that was perfect for this world. Wind style. Great breakthrough. He took a deep breath and exhaled a hurricane. A violent, focused gust of wind erupted from his mouth, smashing into the charging hound. The creature, being semi-ethereal, was torn apart by the gale, its form shredded and dispersed like so much smoke in the wind. The final hound, seeing its brethren destroyed, let out A frustrated howl and began to dissolve, sinking back into the shadows and retreating from this plane. Silence fell upon the ruined street. The surviving Aegis hunters, battered and bleeding, stared at Naruto. Their enemy, their target, the man who had just saved their lives and single-handedly destroyed creatures that had been overwhelming them. Kato lowered his flickering shield, his arm trembling with exhaustion. He looked at Naruto, then at the terrified mother and daughter, then at the armed gangsters and the fierce-eyed girls standing ready to fight. His entire worldview, the bedrock of his order's dogma, had been shattered in the span of 5 minutes. Arisugawa wasn't the beacon for the storm. He was the only storm that mattered. The girls rushed to Naruto's side. "Are you okay?" Chitoge asked, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "Naruto-sama, that was," Marika started, at a loss for words. Kosaki, after making sure her mother was unharmed, looked at him, her eyes filled with terror, awe, and a million questions. What are you?" she whispered, the question hanging in the air for everyone to hear. Naruto looked at their faces. He looked at Kato's shattered expression. He looked at the armed gangsters who served him and the magic-wielding hunters who hunted him. The lie was over. The pretense was gone. There was no hiding anymore. He let out a long, weary breath. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent street. "I died once already. I was a ninja, a soldier, a leader from another world that was destroyed by a war with gods." He met their stunned gazes, his own eyes filled with an ancient sadness and an unbreakable resolve. "I was reborn here, hoping for a quiet life. But it seems the ghosts of my past have followed me. That devourer your order fears, it's a remnant from my old world. A parasite that feeds on the energy of life, the same energy you call magic and I call chakra." He expected them to run, to scream, to look at him with the same fear as Kosaki's mother. Instead, he saw something else. Marika's adoring gaze didn't waver. To her, this just confirmed what she already believed. He was a divine being. Chitoge's expression was one of dawning, terrifying understanding. The impossible strength, the clones, the calm in the face of death. It all made sense now. She didn't look scared. She looked relieved, as if a great mystery had finally been solved. She took a half step closer to him, an unconscious gesture of solidarity. And Kosaki. She looked at him, her mind reeling with the impossible revelation. A reincarnated ninja from another world. It was insane. It was a fairy tale. But she had seen the Rasengan. She had seen the hurricane from his lips. She had felt the goodness in him. Her fear was eclipsed by a wave of overwhelming empathy. The weight he carried, the loneliness he must have felt, it was unimaginable. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched. She gently placed her palm on his arm. He flinched, surprised by the contact. She didn't pull away. She just looked at him, tears welling in her eyes, not of fear, but of compassion. She gave him a small, watery, but completely accepting smile. In that one, simple gesture, she answered the question for all of them. It didn't matter what he was, or where he came from. He was Naruto. Their Naruto. Naruto stared at her, at the unwavering acceptance in her eyes, and felt a crack appear in the lonely fortress he had built around his heart for 2 lifetimes. From across the street, Kato Ishikawa slowly, deliberately, lowered his weapon. His hand dropped to his side. The hunt was over. He had been hunting the monster, when he should have been trying to ally with the god. He took a step forward, his expression no longer that of a hunter, but of a man who knew he was desperately, apocalyptically out of his depth. "Uzumaki," Kato said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. An alliance forged in fire. The aftermath of the battle was a study in surrealism. The street was cordoned off not by police tape, but by a tense, silent perimeter of Shuegumi Yakuza and Beehive gangsters. Hei stood shoulder to shoulder with the surviving, shell-shocked Aegis Order hunters, a bizarre tableau of mortal enemies united by a common, terrifying experience. They collected their wounded and their dead under the watchful, indifferent gaze of the moon. The official story, already being spun by Marika on the phone with her bewildered father, would be a massive gas line explosion. The reality was far more complicated. The new headquarters was a neutral ground. The top floor of a luxury hotel owned by Marika's family, cleared out and secured by a combination of Commissioner Tachibana's most discreet officers, Naruto's gangster army, and Kato's Aegis hunters. It was a powder keg of an alliance, a gathering of factions who, just hours earlier, had been trying to kill, arrest, or avoid one another. In the center of the penthouse suite, which had been converted into a war room, Kato Ishikawa laid an ancient, yellowed scroll across a glass table. It was covered in archaic calligraphy and complex diagrams. The Amatsu Mikabashi, the Void Eater, the Devourer, Kato began, his voice grim. He was no longer Naruto's hunter. He was a colleague, albeit a deeply unsettled one. Our order has known of it for 3,000 years. We believed it to be a myth, a primordial god of chaos that was defeated and banished at the dawn of time. We were wrong. It was not a god. It was a living creature. And it was not banished. It was wounded and cast out. He pointed to a diagram on the scroll. It depicted a massive, swirling vortex of darkness, and falling away from it, a smaller, radiant figure. Our texts say the Sage of the Six Paths, the legendary progenitor of our world's spiritual arts, fought the Devourer and cast it into the outer void. We believed the sage was a mythological figure from this world. But you, he looked at Naruto, you come from that world, don't you? The sage was real. The Otsutsuki are real. Naruto stood opposite him, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the scroll. The sage was my ancestor. I carry his legacy. The creature you fear is what remains of Kagaya Otsutsuki's ambition, a parasitic entity she and her clan used to drain worlds of their life force. When we defeated her, its primary anchor was destroyed. It was cast adrift, wounded and starving, in the space between dimensions. A heavy silence descended as everyone in the room, Chitoge, Marika, Kosaki, Ruri, Claude, and the highest-ranking lieutenants of the gangs, processed the cosmic scale of the threat. And my reincarnation, Naruto continued, his voice heavy, my soul, which is saturated with the chakra of my old world, acted as a lighthouse in the dark. It smelled home, and now it's coming. Ruri, who was hooked into the Aegis Order's data network via a hardline Kato had provided, looked up from her laptop. Her face pale. The energy readings are confirming it. There's a massive distortion in local space-time, growing exponentially. It's not a tear. It's more like a hole being eaten through reality. At its current rate of approach, it will fully manifest in this dimension in less than 24 hours. What happens when it does? Chitoge asked, her voice tight. It will begin to feed, Kato said grimly. First, on concentrated energy sources, power plants, magical nexuses, and people like Naruto-san. Then, it will move on to the life force of every living thing on the planet. Plants, animals, people, everything. It will not stop until this world is a dead, sterile rock. Then it will move on to the next. Kosaki, who had been standing quietly with her mother near the back of the room, stepped forward. Mrs. Onodera, still shaken but refusing to leave her daughter's side, held her hand. The scroll, Kosaki said, pointing a trembling finger at a section of the diagram. It shows the locket, and the keys. Kato nodded. The Aegis Order believed the world's lock, and its keys were a failsafe, a weapon of last resort. We never understood how to activate it. The texts are obscure. They speak of a pillar, who must channel the three virtues, to sanctify the world and erect a great seal. He looked from Naruto to the three girls. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. You, Uzumaki, are the pillar. The power source. His gaze shifted to Chitoge. The first virtue. Strength. Not just physical, but the strength of vitality itself. A roaring, untamed life force. Then to Marika, the second virtue. Devotion. An unbreakable will. A spirit so focused and absolute it can withstand any pressure. And finally to Kosaki, the third virtue. Purity. A gentle, cleansing energy. A soul so pure it can wash away corruption and sanctify the profane. The three girls stared at him, then at each other. Their entire lives, their personalities, their very essences were not random. They were components in a world-saving machine they never knew existed. Their childhood promise with Raku wasn't the point, their connection to the keys was. Why were the descendants of the original guardians, their bloodlines carrying the latent potential for these virtues? The ritual described as a form of fuinjutsu on a global scale, Naruto said, his EY's tracing the complex patterns on the scroll. It's designed to erect a torii, a gateway. Not to destroy the devourer, but to permanently seal it outside our dimension. To close the door my arrival opened. Can you do it? Adelt Kurisaki boomed from the corner, his voice betraying a hint of fear beneath the bravado. I can, Naruto said. But I can't do it alone. I will be the focus, but the power must come from them. He looked at Chitoge, Marika, and Kosaki. The ritual will temporarily bind your life forces to mine. I will draw upon your strength, your devotion, your purity, and channel it into the seal. The backlash will be immense. There is a very real chance it could kill you. Or me. Or all of us. He didn't soften the blow. He didn't hide the risk. He gave them the unvarnished, brutal truth. Marika was the first to answer, a brilliant, fearless smile on her face. I have been living on borrowed time since I was a child, Naruto-sama. You gave me a taste of what it's like to truly live. If I must give that life to save the world, and to protect you, then I give it gladly. My devotion is yours. Chitoge stepped forward, her fists clenched. She looked not at Naruto, but at Kosaki, at her worried mother. At the scared faces of the men who worked for her father. Her life had been a cage, and then a chaotic mess. But now, it had a purpose. A clear, terrifying, magnificent purpose. I've spent my whole life being told I'm too strong, too loud, too much. If that strength can actually protect everyone, then use it. I'm in. All eyes turned to Kosaki. She was trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of the moment. She looked at her mother, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. She looked at Naruto, at the immense burden he carried alone. She remembered the feeling the white light erupting from her hand, the feeling of pushing back the darkness. It was terrifying, but it was also right. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice soft but clear. But I'm more scared of what will happen if we do nothing. I trust you, Naruto-kun. It was the first time she had used his given name so familiarly. My life is in your hands. The decision was made. The alliance had its strategy. But their unity was immediately tested. The doors to the penthouse suite burst open. A dozen Aegis Order hunters, clad in white and gold ceremonial armor instead of their usual dark coats, stormed in. They were led by a stern, older man with a long white beard and eyes that burned with cold fire. Kato Ishikawa, the old man roared, his voice echoing with power. You stand with the anomaly. You have betrayed your oath. You are a traitor to the order and to humanity. Kato stepped in front of Naruto, his own blade wand drawn. Elder Magnus, you are a fool. The anomaly is our only hope. I have seen the enemy. I have seen what he can do. You have been deceived by its power. Magnus retorted. He pointed a gauntleted finger at Naruto. That creature is a cancer. The only cure is excision. We will perform our duty. We will capture the anomaly and seal it away, even if we must cut through every traitor and criminal in this room to do it. This was the hardliner faction. The Elots who couldn't see past their dogma. So much for your alliance, Chitoge's father growled, as his men in the Shuegumi Yakuza drew their weapons. Claude moved to shield Chitoge, his hand on his gun. Stand down. Naruto's voice boomed, imbued with a touch of ki that made the very air vibrate. This is our fight. He looked at Kato. You and me. Let's show them what a real alliance looks like. Kato stared at him for a second. Then a slow, fierce grin spread across his face. With pleasure. The two of them moved as one. The hardliners charged, their golden armor glowing. Kato met them head on. His movements were precise, economical, a fencer's dance. He cast Sanctus Clypeus shields to block their energy blasts, parried their glowing blades with his own, and countered with quick, debilitating spells that targeted the joints in their armor, freezing them solid. He was a master of magical combat, a precision instrument. Naruto was a hurricane. He didn't bother with finesse. He created a dozen shadow clones. And the room exploded into a chaotic melee. While Kato engaged the elite guard, Naruto and his clones descended upon the rest. He flowed through them, a whirlwind of orange and black. He didn't use the Rasengan. He didn't need to. It was all taijutsu. A punch here, a kick there. He moved with overwhelming speed and power, disarming them, breaking their stances, and neutralizing them with swift, non-lethal strikes to their nerve clusters. An Aegis Knight swung a massive, glowing warhammer at him. Naruto didn't dodge. He caught the hammerhead in one hand, stopping its momentum dead. The knight stared in disbelief. Naruto squeezed, and the enchanted metal of the hammer cracked under the pressure of his grip. He then wrenched it free and tossed it aside, disabling the knight with a simple palm strike to the chest that sent him flying into a wall. Naruto and Kato fought back to back, their styles a perfect contrast. Kato was the shield and scalpel, defending and disabling with tactical precision. Naruto was the hammer and the storm, overwhelming and unstoppable. Within a minute, the entire hardliner faction was on the floor, groaning, disarmed, or unconscious. Elder Magnus, the last one standing, stared in horror, his fanatical certainty shattered by the sheer, overwhelming power he had just witnessed. Naruto walked up to him, his expression calm. "Your war is over," he said simply. "Now, you will help us win the real one." The coup was crushed. The alliance was solidified in the fire of shared combat. There were no more factions. There was only Naruto's army. With hours to go until the Devourer's arrival, the War Council began in earnest. The plan was set. Naruto, with the girls, would perform the sealing ritual at the epicenter of the manifestation, the Tokyo Skytree. The tallest structure in the city, which acted as a natural lightning rod for dimensional energy. Everyone else had a part to play. Kato and the now unified Aegis Order would form the first line of defense, casting a massive hemispherical barrier over the city to delay the Devourer's influence and contain its minions. Commissioner Tachibana, now fully briefed and Ving moved past denial into grim acceptance, mobilized the entire Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department and coordinated with the Japan Self-Defense Forces. Their job? Civilian evacuation and battling NY physical manifestations that broke through the magical barriers. The Yakuza and the gangsters, under the joint command of Adelt and the Oyabun, would act as a rapid response force on the ground, using their knowledge of the city's underbelly to protect evacuation routes and hunt down smaller entities in the streets. The world was about to end, and its last line of defense was an impossible coalition of cops, criminals, sorcerers, and teenagers. As the final preparations were made, the sky began to change. The sun set, but the darkness that followed was not natural. A sickly, purple-black stain spread from the zenith, the stars disappearing behind a veil of cosmic rot. A low, subsonic hum filled the air, a sound felt more in the bones than heard with the ears, causing a primal wave of AR and despair to wash over the populace. The Devourer was coming. In the quiet moments before the storm, Naruto gathered Chitoge, Marika, and Kosaki in the dojo of his old home, their first sanctuary. The place was imbued with a sense of peace that felt a world away from the impending apocalypse. He looked at them, not as virtues or components, but as the young women they were. Chitoge, trying to hide her fear behind a mask of fierce determination. Marika, her eyes shining with a terrifying, beautiful faith. Kosaki, her gentle hands clenched into fists, her resolve as strong as steel. "There is one last thing," Naruto said, his voice soft. He held up the locket. "The scroll calls this a ritual to bind our life forces. A vow of shared destiny. In my world, we had a name for a promise like this, a vow to stand together. To protect one another, to share one life, even unto death." He looked at each of them in turn, his heart, for the first time in this life, completely open. He had sought a quiet life, a life of solitude. Instead, these three, in their own chaotic, beautiful ways, had stormed the walls of his heart and shown him that a life shared, even one filled with conflict, was infinitely more precious. It was called a marriage. He wasn't proposing a romance. He was defining their bond. They were not his tools. They were his partners, his family. Tears welled in Marika's eyes. A deep, crimson blush spread across Chitoge's face as she stubbornly looked away. Kosaki's heart gave a painful, hopeful lurch, and she met his gaze, her own tears reflecting the low light of the dojo. They didn't need to say yes. Their presence here, their willingness to face the end with him, was answer enough. In a quiet, solemn ceremony, with the dying world as their witness, they performed their own ritual. One by one, they stepped forward. Marika offered him her key, her hand brushing his. For my savior. Chitoge thrust her ki at him, refusing to meet his eyes. Don't mess this up, Bean Sprout. Kosaki gently placed her ki in his hand, her fingers lingering on his for a moment. For our future. He accepted the 3 keys, their energy humming in harmony with the locket. He placed the locket around his neck. The Fuinjutsu formula within flared to life, a dormant sun awakening. Their vow was sealed, not with rings or with words, but with a promise to face the dawn, or the end, together. They were no longer just allies. They were a family, bound by a vow made at the end of the world. And as they prepared to leave the dojo for the final battle, Naruto Uzumaki finally understood. He hadn't been reborn to find a quiet life. He had been reborn to find them. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Vow of a New Dawn. The world was holding its breath. A silent, terrified pause before the final, cataclysmic plunge. From the observation deck of the Tokyo Skytree, the city below was a strange diorama of organized chaos. Red and blue lights of emergency vehicles flowed through the streets in controlled, arterial streams, guiding the last wave of evacuations. The air was unnaturally cold, the silence broken only by the mournful, distant wail of sirens and the low, soul-crushing hum of the approaching abyss. The sky was no longer sky. It was a roiling, bruised ceiling of violet and black, a window into a dimension of pure non-existence. At its center, a hole was opening. It wasn't a hole of darkness, but a hole of nothing, a patch of sky where light, space, and time themselves had ceased to be. It was expanding, eating the edges of reality like acid-dissolving paper. Naruto stood at the very center of the observation deck, flanked by his 3 wives. They formed a triangle around him, a small island of defiant life against the cosmic tide. Chitoge's hands were clenched, her knuckles white, her jaw set in a stubborn line. Marika stood tall, her fear transmuted into a radiant, unwavering faith that burned in her eyes. Kosaki, her hand clutching her mother's last gift, a small, handmade charm for luck, breathed slowly and deeply, her gentle nature hardened into a core of pure, resolute will. Below them, the city had become a battlefield. Barrier is at 70% integrity. Ruri's voice crackled through Naruto's earpiece, a lifeline of data in the encroaching madness. She was coordinating the entire defense from a mobile command center, a technological Valkyrie directing the war. The Devourer's ambient pressure is immense. Kato says they can't hold it for more than 20 minutes once it fully manifests. As if on cue, the hole in reality tore open. It did not explode. It arrived. The Amatsu Mikabashi, the Void Eater, poured into their dimension. It was not a monster of flesh and bone. It was a being of cosmic horror, a sentient galaxy of antimatter and swirling, light-devouring nebulae. It had no fixed form, only a central, condensed core of absolute blackness that was its heart, and vast, sweeping tendrils of void that lashed out, tasting the new reality. Where those tendrils touched the shimmering Aegis barrier, the shield sizzled and decayed, its light devoured. Its very presence was a weapon. Buildings in the quarantine zone began to crumble, not from force, but from a localized entropy, aging 1,000 years in a second. People watching from the edge of the evacuation zone fell to their knees, gripped by a sudden, overwhelming despair. The hope literally leached from their souls. And from its form, pieces began to slough off, dropping into the city below. The hollow hounds, and worse. Creatures of jagged shadow, things with too many limbs. Flying horrors made of shrieking sound and warped light. The minions of the void descended upon Tokyo. Engage. Commissioner Tachibana's voice, steely and resolute, roared over the unified comms network. The battle for Tokyo began. The JSDF's attack helicopters fired missiles that detonated against the larger creatures, only to see them reform an instant later. On the ground, police barricades were overrun, but were immediately reinforced by the Yakuza, their katanas glowing with Aegis-enchanted runes, and the Beehive gangsters, their guns now firing consecrated, explosive rounds developed by Kato's battle mages. It was a scene from a madman's dream. Men in suits and leather jackets fighting back to back with riot police, defending the city they had so often preyed upon. Atop the skytree, Naruto watched the maelstrom below for a fraction of a second. He closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos. His duty was here. It's time, he said, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. He sat cross-legged, the locket resting against his chest. He drew upon the natural energy of the world, the air, the earth, the life humming below. The orange pigmentation of sage mode flowed around his eyes, a sign of his perfect union with the world he was fighting to protect. His sensory perception expanded, encompassing the entire city, the entire battlefield. He felt every struggling soul, every burst of fear, every spark of defiance. He felt Kato's mages straining, their life forces burning like candles in a hurricane. He felt his army fighting and dying in the streets. And he felt his wives, their hearts beating in a frantic, synchronized rhythm. "Give me your strength," he whispered. He placed his hands over the locket. The ritual began. Chitoge, Marika, and Kosaki took their positions. They stood, their backs to him, facing the ruined city, a living shield for their pillar. They held their keys, which began to glow with blinding intensity. Chitoge was first. She let out a defiant roar, a primal scream of pure, untamed life. Her key flared with a brilliant, crimson light. Her life force, the bonfire of her vitality, poured from her, not as a gentle stream, but as a raging torrent. It flowed through the key and into the locket, a wave of raw, indomitable strength. Naruto's body jolted as the power surged into him. He felt his muscles harden, his reserves of stamina swell to an impossible level. It was the power of life itself, refusing to be extinguished. Marika followed. She closed her eyes, a serene smile on her face. Her ki erupted in a shaft of diamond-white light. Her spirit, her absolute and unshakable devotion, focused into a singular, razor-sharp point. She poured her entire being, her will to protect the man who had saved her, into the locket. It was not a wave of power, but a lance. It pierced Naruto's spirit, not harming him, but reinforcing his will, sharpening his resolve into an unbreakable weapon. The despair washing over the city, the voice of the void that whispered of futility and surrender, it all vanished, shattered against the shield of her devotion. Finally, it was Kosaki's turn. She held her ki before her, her eyes soft with a fierce, maternal love for the broken world below. Her ki glowed with a gentle, pure, golden light. Her power flowed, not as a torrent or a lance, but as a cleansing tide. It was the spiritual purity Kato had seen, amplified 1,000-fold. It washed through Naruto, not adding power, but refining it. It burned away his fear, his doubt, his anger, leaving only his purpose. It sanctified the raw strength of Chitoge and the focused will of Marika, weaving them together, preparing them for the Great Seal. Naruto roared, his head thrown back, as the three virtues surged within him. The locket round his neck blazed with the light of a new sun, a tricolored aura of red, white, and gold swirling around him. The girls staggered, their faces pale, the sheer drain of the ritual threatening to consume them. But they did not fall. They held their ground, their hands gripping their keys, their bodies a conduit for a power that could save the world. He felt the devourer's attention shift. The great, cosmic entity, which had been focused on consuming the Aegis barrier, turned its vast and ancient malice towards the pinpoint of light that defied it. A massive tendril of pure void detached from its main body and descended upon the skytree. Naruto-kun, Kosaki cried out as the sky went black above them. Naruto opened his eyes. They were no longer just the eyes of a sage. They were blazing with the combined power of his wives. He rose to his feet, the ground shaking with the power he now contained. "I am the pillar," he said, his voice echoing with the power of three souls. "I am the strength of life that endures." He looked toward Chitoge's position. "I am the devotion of the heart that protects." He glanced toward Marika. "I am the purity of the spirit that hopes." He met Kosaki's tear-filled eyes in his mind. "And I am the vow of the ninja who never goes back on his word." He gathered it all. The sage energy of the world. The roaring vitality of Chitoge. The unbreakable will of Marika. The cleansing purity of Kosaki. And deep within his soul, the last, slumbering embers of Kurama's chakra, the gift from his oldest friend, flared to life, merging with the torrent. He thrust his hands forward. Palms open toward the descending void. Fuinjutsu. Torii of the Six Paths Genesis seal. Energy erupted from him. Not a beam or a blast, but a concept. A statement. "You are not welcome here." From the ground below, from the very foundations of the city, two colossal pillars of pure, golden energy erupted, screaming towards the heavens. They smashed into the descending void tendril, not just blocking it, but vaporizing it, converting its nothingness into pure light. The pillars rose, higher and higher, until they towered over the Amatsu Mikabashi itself. A third, curved beam of energy formed between them, connecting their peaks. A great torii gate, a divine archway woven from the very fabric of hope, now stood between their reality and the devourer. The entity recoiled, its ancient, alien mind registering something it had not felt in millennia, a barrier it could not consume. It let out a silent, psychic scream of rage and hammered against the seal, its void tendrils lashing against the golden light. The torii flickered, and a wave of feedback slammed into Naruto. He cried out, blood pouring from his nose. The strain was unimaginable. He felt his consciousness start to fray. Don't you dare give up. Bean Sprout. Chitoge's voice, fierce and strong, echoed in his mind. We are with you, Naruto-sama. Always. Marika's unwavering faith was a shield for his soul. You're not alone anymore, Naruto-kun. Kosaki's gentle strength was a balm on his fracturing spirit. Their hands found his back. Chitoge's, calloused and strong. Marika's, delicate but firm. Kosaki's, soft and warm. They were no longer just channeling their energy. They were physically holding him up, pouring the last dregs of their strength, their very lives, into him. He felt their unified will, their love, their absolute trust. It was the final component. The true core of the seal. Naruto roared, a final, defiant cry against the dying of the light. He pushed. With everything he was. With everything they were. The torii flared with a light so bright it eclipsed the sun. The sigils and fuinjutsu script that covered its surface blazed to life. The gate, which had been a barrier, became a vortex. It began to pull, its spiritual gravity reversing. The Amatsu Mikabashi, for the first time in its eons of existence, was no longer the consumer. It was being consumed. It fought back, lashing and struggling, but the Genesis seal, powered by the life force of a world and the love of four unified souls, was absolute. The Void Eater was dragged, piece by screaming piece, through the gateway, cast back into the outer void from whence it came. The last tendril of its being was pulled through, and with a final, cataclysmic slam that was felt in every soul on the planet, the gateway sealed itself shut. The torii of golden light faded. Its job done. The sickly purple stain in the sky vanished. The oppressive hum ceased. The hollow hounds and other minions, their connection to their master severed, dissolved into dust. And the sun began to rise. Its first rays broke over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over a battered but living city. On top of the skytree, there was only silence. Naruto collapsed, his energy completely, utterly spent. Chitoge, Marika, and Kosaki fell with him, their strength gone, but their hands never leaving his. They lay in a heap, a tangle of limbs, completely exhausted but alive. Breathing. The war was over. 6 months later, the Onodera patisserie was brighter than ever. It had been rebuilt, the funds provided by a new, joint philanthropic venture B. Etween Kurisaki International and the Shuei Foundation for Urban Renewal, an organization managed with meticulous, almost obsessive care by a certain Kenji Tanaka. Behind the counter, a young man with bright blonde hair and a calm smile was carefully arranging a tray of sakura mochi. He moved with a slight stiffness, a lingering echo of a battle that had nearly torn his soul apart, but his blue eyes were clear and peaceful. Hey, are you even listening to me? Chitoge Kurisaki demanded, leaning over the counter. She was wearing a simple apron over her clothes. I said you put too much sugar in the last batch of anko. You're going to give everyone cavities. I followed your mother's recipe exactly, Naruto replied, his voice calm. Perhaps your palate is simply unrefined. Unra. Why you? Before she could vault over the counter, a pair of arms wrapped around Naruto's waist from behind. Don't listen to her, Naruto-sama, Marika Tachibana purred, resting her head on his back. Everything you make is divine. Let me have a taste, just to be sure. She had made a full recovery, her curse having vanished completely when its cosmic source was sealed away. Her health was now as vibrant as her personality. Kosaki Onodera, emerging from the kitchen with a fresh pot of tea, just smiled at the scene, a warm, fond expression on her face. Ruri, sitting at a corner table with a book, rolled her eyes, but a small smile played on her lips. The world had been saved. The story the public knew was one of an unprecedented solar flare that had caused mass hallucinations and geological instability. A story conveniently supported by both the Aegis Order's memory-altering magic on key officials and the global media empire owned by one of Adelt Kurisaki's shell corporations. The world was safe, but it was not the same. Cops and Yakuza now shared information to take down human trafficking rings. Aegis mages worked with scientists to study clean energy. The old lines had been blurred, washed away by a shared struggle for survival. And at the center of it all was this small, peaceful sweet shop. The locket and keys, their power spent, were now just jewelry. Symbols, not of a forgotten promise made by children, but of an unforgettable vow made by a family at the end of the world. Naruto looked at the three women who had upended his quiet life, who had dragged him into chaos, who had stood with him at the abyss, and who had given him a home more real than any he had ever known. His wives, his partners, his chaotic, wonderful, noisy family. He had been reborn seeking silence, but he had found a symphony. And it was beautiful. Chapter 7 End.